In a few moments, and remember to silence your cell phones, please.
Probably don't have many people here. How many do we need for a quorum again? How many do we need for a quorum? But how many do we need? 42? 45? Yeah. We seem to be rather light today. Just hopefully got a lot of people on the phone. Got a whole side here.
We're having a quick discussion here at the head table on quorum.
But I think it's 45 because we did this once before when we had the
Half plus one.
yeah I think you're right. So we have 50. 28. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, 28. Okay. We'll check on that.
So we're good? Okay. Well, we'll do that.
Okay. We'll just we'll see.
You ready to start?
Yep. I'll get
Okay.
started.
Let's. Hi.
Actually, we have 9 on the good.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Hi. Welcome to the 5th meeting of the 5th CSRIC.
Sixth council meeting.
The 6th. Okay. Did you say that before?
Sixth meeting of the
Sixth
fifth
council
CSRIC.
meeting.
Oh, I
of
thought
the
we
fifth
said before it was the 5th of the
CSRIC
5th. 6th of the 5th.
This is the sixth of the fifth.
All right. Well, I stand corrected. And I'm glad you all could make it. I hope you had a safe trip in. And today we've got a number of reports for you to consider and to vote on. They're all on the agenda before you. We also have a number of summaries or readouts from the working groups that will not be presenting a report for a vote today. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my boss, Admiral Simpson, and Dave asked you to say a few words to get us started.
Great. Well, thank you. And let me use this opportunity to identify one member that's not with us, who's no longer a member, but we're all very happy for John Shantz, who's been your chair. John has taken a different business opportunity, not with Comcast, and so he's no longer of the sector and can no longer be the chair. So Teresa has thankfully stepped up to fill the role as interim chair, and we will be working to select a new chair in the next couple of weeks. I would like to thank John and Teresa and Comcast for just doing such a wonderful job in CSRIC 5 for not just the meetings. It's really everything that leads to the meeting, and a significant focus on team building that hasn't been lost on us. And we really appreciate that, Teresa, and if you could pass on to John that we appreciate his efforts as well. Yeah. So this is the 6th of the 5th, and I absolutely appreciate the commitment that each of you are making to this effort. It's a lot of work, and you all have daytime jobs, but we continue to see such a good set of actions that come out of the CSRIC work that we couldn't be more happy with the actions of CSRIC 5. And I was with the chairman this morning for a couple of hours, and he referred to several issues that are beginning to weigh on his mind about the future and networks as we go forward. And in so many of the cases, there's ongoing CSRIC activity to reduce risk in what the future becomes in networks. So thank you all for your part in that. Today, you'll be hearing from 5 working groups that have prepared items for vote. So we're at the end of a very productive road for those 5. Working Group 1, which has been focusing on evolving 911 services, is presenting a final report and reviews several location-based routing methods that could potentially be used for wireless 911 call routing. Each location-based routing method has its own characteristics and considerations, with just a single version for use by all EAS participants. You may have seen an article in the Washington Post Saturday about vulnerabilities with the existing 911 system for the nation. Certainly that's representative of the kinds of things that when you have choke points in networks, you sooner or later, when an adversary learns how to take advantage of those choke points, regret the fact that you had choke points. Location-based routing is an opportunity to eliminate some choke points and get the full mesh of networks to begin to play here. So very much looking forward to that report. Working Group 2 on emergency alerting platforms is presenting two reports, one on social media and one on geo-targeting. The report on social media is intended to advocate for using social media to complement alerting. EAS and WIA can be made even stronger when they're used in concert with other methods and platforms. This report will also emphasize the potential opportunity and advantages for social media platforms in emergency alerting. Working Group 1's second report on geo-targeting is intended to advocate WIA usage by addressing the most frequent complaint of alert originators, that perceived geo-targeting capability at the sub-county level, and also seeks to shed light on the potential benefit of expanding WIA messages to enable a new non-WIA service that would allow message recipients to communicate with alert originators through other communication methods. You just have to look at some of the flooding in Louisiana recently and how many residents were surprised that the flooding occurred in their neighborhood, which isn't typically in a floodplain, and they didn't get a tailored alert. The alerts were so broad that it turned out to not be actionable for many of the communities within Louisiana impacted by the floods. So it's very timely that we're going to talk about the geo-targeting potential of alerting in the future. Working Group 3's report recommends best practices for the delivery of multilingual emergency alert system and emergency information. Just saying Cajun is a foreign language, right? We need to get some Cajun alerts down in Louisiana's friend. My friends from Louisiana will appreciate that. Working Group 3 evaluated whether there are any regulatory barriers to multilingual alerting in the current FCC EAS rules and concluded that there apparently are none. Working Group 4A, the Submarine Cable Resiliency Working Group, has prepared a report examining the factors that influence routing and landing of submarine cables and what the FCC might do with its statutory jurisdiction to enhance geographic diversity in order to promote network resiliency. The report recommends that FCC use its expertise to highlight for other government agencies concerns about and potential measures to promote geographic diversity of submarine cable routes and landings through implementation of specific recommendations. Very much looking forward to that. Our nation depends on the arteries that traverse the oceans, and being smart about where those arteries are and having more of them in more diverse locations is just goodness. And finally, Working Group 6 has been examining and reviewing the best ways to provide assurances to the FCC and the public that recommended security capabilities are being implemented by network equipment vendors. Their report recommends voluntary mechanisms that provide assurances to the FCC and the public that the security practices are being applied. CSRIC recognizes that while communications network organizations' efforts associated with security by design are foundational to secure communications, so too are means of demonstrating this security, and really looking forward to see how we would together exchange in that information sharing to exercise our oversight risk responsibilities while ensuring that companies can be as agile as they need to be in addressing cybersecurity challenges. Working Group 5 will be presenting a non-voting report that reviews examples of information sharing trust pools. I get asked every time I speak anywhere or travel anywhere, okay, what are we doing about information sharing and specifically machine-to-machine information sharing analysis organizations? There's a lot of folks that are looking to Working Group 5 to come together with recommendations that will help the communications sector begin and in some cases improve upon meaningful machine-to-machine cybersecurity information sharing, and the trust pool component of that is an important one. 6 of the working groups, 4B, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, will provide updates today, presentations on their progress thus far, and their plans for the next CSRIC meeting. The next CSRIC meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, December 21st, Christmas CSRIC, so looking forward to that. Finally, again, let me reiterate a thanks for all of your hard work and leadership. The issues that you have all been asked to address are particularly challenging and take a great deal of research, thought, and time to resolve. You know, the alignment between the public safety community, consumers groups that would benefit from this work, but the companies that are faced with really having to bend metal and really having to pay and resource things and still stay in business. That engagement is so important, and that ability to not be prescriptive in the how and watch that alignment regularly produce results that the nation benefits from is really impressive. The diligence that the working group chairs and members have been applying to ensure that all the issues and obstacles are fully addressed is impressive, and you have our gratitude on your participation in this public-private partnership. So thanks so much, and let's get on to the reports.
Great. Thanks, Dave, for that. So I'd like to welcome the council and move on with getting into our presentations overall. As Dave said, we have a fairly noteworthy session here, being able to vote on 6 different presentations from the 5 working groups. And I can tell you that they have worked extremely diligent over the last 15 months to bring these recommendations to us here today. Suzanne issued all of the papers and presentations about 3 weeks ago, so hopefully everyone had an opportunity to review them and is prepared either to approve them or ask for clarifying questions. So at this time, I'd like to ask Working Group 1 to come to the podium. Working Group 1 is co-chaired by sorry, I made a mistake. So we need to first do roll call. So we need to, what we want to do is go around the room first, and if everyone could announce himself or herself, the organization that they support. We'll go clockwise, starting on my left, and then we'll go to the phone. Thanks, Suzanne. Teresa Hennessy, Comcast. My left.
Francisco Sanchez, Harris County, Texas.
Rod Rasmussen with Infoblocks. This needs to be updated on the sign. Thanks.
Wayne Pacine, Federal Reserve Board.
Yeah, Robert Mayer, U.S. Telecom Association.
Jeff England, Silver Star Communications.
Maureen McLaughlin, Iridium.
Susan Miller, Addis.
Brian Joseph. Brian Joseph, CTIA.
Kyle Milady, Verizon.
Allison Peacock, AT&T.
Andy Ellis, Akamai.
Thibodeau, Insight.
Richard Perlotto, Shadow Server.
Bob Gassner with the American Cable Association.
Kent Bressie, Harris Wiltshire for the North American Submarine Cable Association.
Scott Weber with Charter Communications.
Gary Smith, Cherry Creek Radio.
Bill Check, NCTA.
Ethan Lucarelli, in Marset, substituting for Donna Bethea Murphy, in Marset.
Dorothy Spears Dean, representing the National Association of State 911 Administrators.
Jennifer Manor, EchoStar.
Pete Fonash, Department of Homeland Security.
Michael Brown, RSA.
Suzanne Cameron, FCC.
Jeff Goldthorpe, FCC.
Dave Simpson, FCC.
And now if we could go to the audio bridge. What council members do we have on the audio bridge now? We have a slight technical difficulty. We'll be with you in a moment.
Unless you're on the phone bridge, in which case, please pipe up.
It's all an experiment.
So while we're waiting, I'll share with the whole group. My son at Virginia Tech just clued me in on this month at Virginia Tech. Chipotle will start delivering burritos via UAS unmanned aerial systems. So the future is upon us.
Okay.
That's right, yeah. I will offer that was it True who shared with me, of course, being a Wahoo from UVA, that the Wahoos down in Charlotte, there you go, don't yet have UAS delivered burritos. They're holding out for UAS delivered mint juleps. It's just a different class down there, right?
Gotta have something to steeplechase.
Yeah.
Boots you guys wear.
Yeah.
We don't have anything. VMI is like a damn prison. Yeah, really. 4 years.
Hang on a second. 1, 2.
I think we just heard the bridge come in. Can we get a roll call for those on the bridge?
Check 1, 2. There we go. Bridge is working now.
Mark Annis, City of Riverside Fire Department, Office of Emergency Management.
Tim Walden, CenturyLink.
Dana Golub, PBS.
Jonathan Powell, CNI.
Billy Rogers, Sprint.
Bill Smith, PayPal.
Mary Boyd, West Safety.
Lori Flaherty, National 911 Program at the DOT.
Mark Hazy, Commerce NOAA.
Kim Kiever, Cox Communications.
That's us over the top. Yeah. We ended up with 27.
Okay, well, great. Thanks for that. It looks like we now have a quorum and can call the meeting to session. We will have first the voting working groups come up. They will present. After the presentation is done, we'll have a short time to be able to ask them questions. I ask if you have a question, if you could put your 10 card up vertically so that we know to be able to identify you for any questions you might have. After all questions have been asked, we'll go for a vote and a simple yay or nay to confirm the approval and recommendations that are presented today. So at this time, I would now like to welcome Working Group 1 to the podium. Jeff Cohen and Susan Sherwood are our co-chairs for Evolving 911.
Thank you very much. I'm Jeff Cohen, and my co-chair Susan will rotate with me as we go through our presentation. And I guess I'll just wait for it to appear. Do we have a clicker too? Thank you, Teresa. Okay. All right, first what I was going to do is just briefly go over what our first deliverable was about. It was to review public safety industry best practices and standard operating procedures on legacy, transitional, and by that we mean IP-based, and next-generation 911 systems for rerouting 911 calls between PSAPs due to the use of cell sectors for routing purposes, and where necessary, identify gaps and make recommendations towards optimizing PSAP reroutes. So we deliver that on a timely basis back in February. In that report, we reviewed and included the following topics: public safety and industry best practices and standard operating procedures on legacy, transitional, and next-generation 911 systems, and inter-jurisdictional coordination for MSAG and GIS. Okay, getting to the topic of today, our Task 2, which we are reporting on today. Work began on this back in March. We were to study and make recommendations on the architectural, technical, operational standards, and security requirements, including cyber, of location-based routing that uses longitude and latitude information or other location identification methods, when available, to determine the routing to the appropriate PSAP for a voice 911 call from wireless devices that include CMRS, IP-based, meaning VoLTE or Wi-Fi, and over-the-top 911 applications. We were to consider different routing delivery options for location-based routing methods, CMRS delivery option, VoIP positioning center delivery option, and external option going directly to the PSAP. Further, we were to explore and report on the pros and cons of various sources of location information available for location-based routing, the potential reliability and accuracy of the sources, and the transition path to LBR of voice 911 calls from legacy to transitional and then fully deployed next-generation 911 systems, in particular identifying the necessary roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders involved in supporting 911 calls and existing and future standards to support the transition. The deliverable for this is a report with guidelines and recommendations, which we will be discussing a little bit more in detail. Oops, what happened here? Somehow this is, there we go. Okay, just wanted to put up on the screen that behind myself and Susan were, of course, our Working Group 1 members who are great contributors, and we've listed them in this report. So the status is that we held weekly meetings. As I mentioned, we started in March. We delivered our report timely to FCC staff on August 26th. To my knowledge, we haven't received any comments or edits prior to that. The first call that we held, as I mentioned, was back in March. We reviewed the task descriptions, identified key topics. We agreed that representatives from key third-party commercial location providers be invited to address us, and we did have 2 companies do that, and we met by phone biweekly. Okay, so this screen shows you the review process that we used, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Sherwood, who's going to take you through a bit of this.
Hello, everybody. Let me move on. There we go. We looked at 5 location-based routing methods, and I'm going to go through them a little more in depth in the next couple of slides, but they were hold the call until Phase 2 location data was available, an interim or a quick fix, a geocoded registered address or a provisioned civic address, device-based hybrid location, and wireless 911 location accuracy emerging technologies. The first one that we looked at was to hold the call until Phase 2 location data is available. And there were 2 options under this. It was either hold the call at the wireless switch to obtain routing information from the mobile positioning center or emergency call server that is delayed in hopes of obtaining up to 5 seconds, basically, in hopes to obtain a Phase 2 location fix. The other option is to hold the call at the PSAP gateway. They would then bid the wireless carrier's location server and hope to get a more precise location that they could use for call routing. Now, the time for them is configurable. They don't have to wait, the 6 seconds basically that you would do at the switch. And the reason the switch is constrained is because of hard-coded defaults at the switch, in which if they don't get routing instructions back, it would default route at the switch level, which is undesirable, I think, from everyone's point of view. The next one, so under this method, the recommendation was that there were current concerns within the work group about delaying the call delivery to the 911 system and the associated PSAPs, and that this method inherently involves and is not recommended for timeframes related to the current availability of Phase 2 location, which averages 12 to 15 seconds, but can go as long as 30 seconds in really challenging locations. The second method was the interim or quick fix. So with this, you would get a call, a location would be delivered within 5 seconds or less. So you would configure, the wireless service provider would configure their system to deliver a fix in 5 seconds or less. And then that would be plotted onto PSAP jurisdictional boundaries and the call routed to the PSAP where the XY is plotted. This does necessitate holding the call for up to 6 seconds in order to get that quick fix. Probably the difference between that and the first method is that the quick fix will deliver a fix. Its accuracy may not be as good as if you just let the location system go through and calculate the Phase 2 fix, which could come as quickly as 5 seconds or could come, like I said earlier, as late as 30 seconds.
But in that regard, is it correct to presume that it would generally be better than the Phase 1 location?
I would say...
We're talking an ambiguity of plus or minus several miles.
Well, with the... it could be. It could be. If it's really challenging and it can't get any reference signals from some cell towers, then it could be actually worse than the Phase 1 location. But I would agree with you that probably more often than not it would be a little better than the Phase 1.
And then the second question is where it's not, could it be built in such a way where it would fall back to the Phase 1 tower
Absolutely.
provided, so that it would, in implementation, it would be only value add and not detract?
Yes, yeah, that would be the way you'd have to configure it, because you wouldn't want to make it worse.
Right. Okay.
All right, let's see. Whoop. Lost. Oh, there it is. Okay. The considerations, to the extent carriers can provide quick fixes in 5 seconds or less and accuracy is appreciably better, then there is value to this method. And the recommendation is that where it's used, it should be used only where you can derive sufficient benefit to justify the investment. That, the methodology may have some benefits, but there are some factors that may limit its usefulness and return on investment. One example comes to mind is if it's implemented at the PSAP and it requires extra functionality and boxes in the network that may cost a good deal more money for them but not have that much additional benefit. It would have some, and that's where you would have to do a cost benefit. The third method, geocode registered or provisioned civic address. And there were 3 options under this. Option 1 is the static or nomadic consumer home devices where the customer registers the location of the device. The second one is semi-permanent devices or cell sites where the carrier or other commercial entity would install them and they would then register the address. And then the third is kind of a new one, which is dynamic geocode registration, where a nomadic device can update its registered civic address kind of on the fly in real time through reverse geocoding. This one does depend on a very accurate reverse geocoding database. The considerations: if the registered address for the device is correct, then it is ideal for routing because it's more of a fixed location, similar to how wireline 911 works. But if the address is incorrect or the device was moved and the address was not updated, then you could result in the location and the delivery of the call very far off from where it needs to go. And the recommendation that the work group had was that the FCC should work with device manufacturers and wireless service providers to assess the feasibility of enabling all devices used for static or nomadic purposes with the ability to validate if it's been moved and to alert the network to its status. Okay, the fourth one, device-based hybrid location. Device-based hybrid is basically a location, it's what you think of when you're looking for the nearest Starbucks, for the most part. It uses a mix of location methods available to the device, including crowdsourced Wi-Fi, AGNSS, and handset-based sensors. It also includes an associated uncertainty estimate that is reflective of the quality of the return location. So one of the considerations here is that with this method, the carrier no longer controls the entire 911 location process from end to end. We are depending on third-party, usually commercial providers, providing a location. The method is now becoming available for use with 911 location systems.
Susan, like the questioning in option 2, presumably this could be used in a way that would do no harm and only add value where those conditions exist.
Yes, I'd say that certainly as far as location delivery to the PSAP goes, using that location to pass on to the PSAP for dispatch, that is certainly doable. And you'll see in our recommendations is that for location-based routing, it has to be done in such a short time frame that we really feel, the work group felt like you needed to determine if there was a reasonable way to, I guess, validate it or do a sanity check on that in order to use it for call routing.
Okay, so it might be available in a timeline that would support phase 1 routing, but to do that quality check to see if that truly improved upon the normal phase 1 routing,
right.
That's where the latency would be potentially unacceptable.
Correct. Yeah. And the second, so that goes in line with the first recommendation to do a further study for the suitability and usefulness for routing purposes. And the second recommendation is the FCC should reach out to smartphone operating system and device providers to invite them to participate in the 911 forums and standards activities as 911 location providers, and advise on what actions by the FCC would be required to provide wireless service providers with the assurances and protections needed in order to implement proprietary third-party location solutions. Another recommendation is the wireless service providers should investigate updating device and location server capabilities in order to choose between an interim assisted GPS fix or a stored location on the device supplied by a commercial location application running on the phone. The fourth recommendation is that the standards bodies TIA and ADAS WTSC should review the J Standard 36, which is what all the carriers use to route calls. It's the interfaces and protocols used by the carriers to route and 911 calls and provide location to public safety. And that should just be reviewed to determine if any interface signaling and parameter changes are required in order to support the use of a device's commercial location as an interim location method for delivery and use with the wireless 911 call, in particular routing. Let's see. And then the last one is the wireless 911 location accuracy emerging technologies. The wireless carriers are currently implementing the FCC's fourth report and order on 911 location accuracy that includes provisions for a test bed to test deployed and new emerging technologies. The location technologies tested in the test bed and currently or subsequently deployed could potentially be leveraged for location-based routing of wireless 911 calls if these technologies derive a sufficiently accurate location fix in 5 seconds or less.
Is there any utility in testing some of the location-based routing techniques in the test beds that are being built for that location accuracy analysis?
Yeah, that would probably that'd be good. I mean, obviously you would have to deploy it before you could.
But there's some
test
instrumentation there, some known positions, and
right.
an ability to record and timestamp that would be useful to leverage.
Yeah, the existing test bed on both the deployed and the emerging does record the time to first fix on those and provides that data. So we could probably use some of the existing data to kind of see the value of each of those methods for that.
Right. I will note again, going back to Louisiana, we had some of the wireless networks that needed to be reconfigured to work around damage to some of the MTSOs and eNode Bs and other elements that were flooded. And one of the unintended consequences of that rerouting and some of the roaming agreements that the wireless industry did in record time. I've never seen that agreement to exercise roaming between carriers brought together quicker. But the PSAPs in the parishes reported a spike in the misroutes, in the routes for calls going to the other parishes, PSAP. As you can imagine, if you're now routing off another company's antennas,
correct,
what has been so optimized is now not working. Location-based routing would have eliminated most of that spike and made the network that much more resilient.
Yeah, I agree with you there. The only thing that came to mind as you were saying that was that if, as in like with Hurricane Katrina, if some of the PSAPs are not available, their boundaries would have to be adjusted almost in real time in order to not route calls to a PSAP that doesn't exist.
Absolutely. The notion of the MSAG would need to evolve into primary, secondary, tertiary mutual support agreements for PSAPs that are no longer available.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. Okay. All right. So where are we? Okay. Considerations. Testing has shown that additional satellite constellations as support with GPS, referred to as GNSS, increases the number of satellites that can be seen by the device, and particularly in challenging locations such as indoors. And as a result, it increases the number of GNSS fixes you can get and the accuracy of those fixes. The hybrid AGNSS OTDOA and the OTDOA location solutions that come with the LTE networks also show a good deal of promise in improving the accuracy of locations delivered for 911 calls over the 2G, 3G, and network-based solutions. But the work group did feel it was a little too early in the deployment cycle of these technologies to see if the time to first fix can be improved to 5 seconds or less. So basically what happened with the older location systems on the 2G, 3G networks is you deployed them and then you spent time working with them to optimize them. We think the same thing will happen with these, and potentially you'll have a lot more fixes that come in 5 seconds or less and that can be used for location-based routing.
Well, and it strikes me as we go over the 5G with smaller cells and an increased number of antennas and distributed antenna systems, not only the increased number of antennas, but the increased geometries available should only improve upon OTDOA as a potential.
I agree. Yeah. One of the other considerations is GPS or cell-based locations. The time to first fix and the accuracy of a given fix are the function of the environmental conditions in which a 911 call is made. So the more challenging the environment, the longer it takes to obtain a fix, and the less accurate it could be if the position inputs are gathered from both GPS and cell-based sources. However, dispatchable location that's also being rolled out with the fourth report and order are not impacted by environmental conditions because these addresses are tied to fixed points within a building and are not geodetically calculated. And additionally, while carriers recently began testing with warm start, and a warm start is where a device has some knowledge of its previous location, but not all knowledge, which is a hot start. A hot start's what would be associated with the tracking that your commercial locations do, like the finding my nearest Starbucks and the drive test. The drive, I'm not coming up with that, but anyway, it is the tracking that makes the device-based hybrid location so accurate. Recommendations. The FCC should continue to support independent testing and analysis of new location accuracy technologies. The FCC should encourage the use of additional AGPS, AGNSS satellite constellations by wireless service providers as one input among many inputs into the 911 location algorithm as it is currently in use with device-based hybrid commercial locations. Another recommendation is that the FCC should seek assurance from the providers of locations calculated from proprietary databases that their databases and algorithms are maintained in a manner that assures consistent and accurate locations. And these databases should be standards compliant and allow for periodic standardized accuracy testing conducted by users and recipients of device-based hybrid locations without sending a voice call to the PSAP.
So what we're really suggesting is these are now potentially an enduring part of the 911 end-to-end ecosystem.
Yes.
That we need to not only seek assurances for, but also clarify 911 liability
correct.
Protections and things like that.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Another recommendation is the FCC should require providers of location fixes calculated from proprietary databases to provide metrics and other performance verification tools to wireless service providers to ensure that those fixes meet accuracy and quality requirements. And finally, the wireless service providers who deliver the 911 calls and are responsible for the calculation of locations fixes passed to public safety must have metrics and procedures in place themselves to ensure that internal positioning methodologies used are reliable, consistent, and performing at expected accuracy and quality requirements. And then Jeff will be coming up to talk about the transition considerations for PSAP systems.
Question, Robert?
Yeah, Susan, just a question. If you go back one slide, I was just curious. It says something about providers of location fixes. If you go back one slide, I can read it. Sorry. Now I can't read it. It says require providers of location fixes calculated from proprietary databases, so on and so forth. Are those providers of location fixes or the owners of those proprietary databases represented by this group at all? Have they sort of been consulted about this role they're being expected to play?
Well, as Jeff mentioned in one of the earlier slides, is we did want their representation on this committee, but they did not want to be on the committee.
Okay. I'm just wondering.
So we would have loved to consult with them.
Well, my concern is, are we volunteering them for something they don't want to do, and might they stop doing it if they start to suddenly have, required to provide metrics and other performance verifications?
I don't know. I don't think so, because it is an integral part of their business. But they have offered it up for 911 use. Okay. But they just, haven't really offered to be a 911 location service provider, if you know what I mean. They're saying you can use a location, but they don't want any of the responsibility that goes with it, at least not that I can tell.
I guess who are they?
Well, probably the biggest ones would be like Apple and Google, and then there's many other smaller providers.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up with the last portion of our consideration. That's the transition considerations for PSAP systems. That's the next slide. And basically what we mean is, how do we view all these potential location-based routing technologies in terms of today's legacy 911 on to next-generation 911 deployment? So the way that the working group looked at this was to view this as the emergency calling architecture having two separate ends or domains, the originating end and the terminating end, and we explored it from both of those. So by originating domain, we mean the domain that's responsible for initiating the 911 call, the initial call routing, and to acquire location associated with the call, and it supports a variety of media, access technologies, and performance profiles. The terminating domain may also perform additional routing, delivers the call, as well as location and call-related data. It typically uses the terms legacy, transitional, and NG911 to describe how any kind of available data is conveyed to the PSAP. And each domain can evolve separately and can impact the other. So looking at the originating service characteristics, and just in a summary fashion, for each of the location-based routing methods that Susan stepped through. First, we talked about holding the call until phase 2 is available. The working group determined that there's no impact in terms of transitional issues, but we have the same issues that Susan had described about the delays for the caller, the telecommunicator inside the PSAP, and the responder agencies. Similarly, for the interim or quick fix location-based routing method, no particular impacts in terms of the transition, but as Susan described, it could improve call handling by directing more calls to the jurisdictionally appropriate PSAP. When we talk about the geocode registered and provisioned civic address method, for the transitional and next generation 911 portions, the ability to timely receive or acquire the location is critical. Susan went into that a bit. And NG911 design already accounts for this approach, but it would be more efficient with an IP to IP interconnection between the wireless service provider and the next generation 911 core ingress components, a capability proposed but not yet implemented by the wireless service providers. For device-based location, again for transitional and next generation 911 options, the options exist to receive or acquire the location in time to route to the jurisdictionally appropriate PSAP. NG911 design already accounts for this approach, but similarly, it's more efficient if there's an IP to IP interconnection between the wireless service provider and the next generation 911 core ingress components. Again, a capability proposed but not yet implemented by wireless service providers. And finally, for the wireless 911 location accuracy emerging technologies that Susan concluded with, we don't see any particular transition impacts, whether for legacy, IP-based, or full next-generation 911. So now addressing the terminating service characteristics, we broke this down in terms of considerations first for legacy and then IP connected and next-gen. And for for legacy, the impact of location-based routing may be significant, and it depends on the solution. But if, for example, there's a need on the part of the PSAP to differentiate the location data that they're receiving or seeing that was intended for routing versus what could be better location and preferred location in terms of identifying the caller, there needs to be a way to reconcile the two so that there's no confusion, and it has to be operationalized as well. Further, legacy ALI systems may require software changes to accept an expanded set of location data, and the availability of this data is further dependent on the capabilities of the PSAP equipment. When we talk about transition considerations for IP-connected emergency services networks, there are non-standard solutions at this point. This is concerning situations where the TDM trunks have been upgraded to IP. So this is what we're talking about, but not necessarily an emergency services interconnected network, ESINet, or next-gen core services. So this is just talking about replacing TDM with IP. And finally, for transition considerations for next-gen, here in that environment, we would be able to prevent a full set of rich data, including location used for routing, as well as other location data requested after the initial call routing was complete. The remainder of our slides is just a summary of our recommendations, which Susan went through. So with that, I will just step through those slides and get to, I guess, nothing. I thought we had a question slide. So imagine there's a question mark up on the screen. And with that, we'll take any questions.
So if you have any questions, if you could move your tent card up vertically for Jeff or Susan. There's no questions in the room. On the phone, are there any questions? Okay, so I think we'll go for a vote. So for those who are in favor of approving Working Group 1's final recommendation on evolving 911, if you could say yay.
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 All opposed? Congratulations. It looks like it's been approved and moving forward. Nice work. Okay, we'd like to invite Working Group 2 up to the podium. Farouk Kabiti is the co-lead with Francisco Sanchez. They actually have two presentations for us today. The first one up for review will be the presentation on the social media and complementary alerting methods. After that presentation is questioned and voted on, we'll go into the second presentation, which will be recommendations on geotargeting and offer many-to-one capabilities. Thank you, Francisco.
Great. So, Admiral, Madam Chairman, get 2 for 1 from us today, so thank you. On social media and complementary alerting, thank you all for letting us to explore that. It's really a part of today's ecosystem when it comes to alerts and warnings and emergency public information, and while it's not something that typically would fall into the FCC or CSRIC, it's important to recognize that and see how we interface with that, and that's simply where things are going in the world. We had a great roster with some diverse backgrounds, expertise, and viewpoints, not only for the social media and complementary alerting, but for the WIA, geotargeting, and many-to-one portions of the report. We brought stakeholders to the table that had not been there before, new technology folks, academics, social scientists, more alert originators, to get a broader perspective, and I think that added a lot of value to the work that resulted from that. Our objectives were tasked to provide recommendations on technical issues such as how public safety officials can leverage various platforms, including commercial alerts and social media, identifying technical opportunities to those barriers in coordinating multiple alerting platforms, as well as the development of standards that could result in improving some public safety outcomes. So from those deliverables in this report, we've got recommendations on complementary alerting systems and social media. We did take into account, aside from the expertise at the table, from the Orlando nightclub shooting, the Paris attacks, Baton Rouge, and a lot of recent events. We used those as opportunities to inform our work, and that proved to be the case not only for this, but also for the WIA reports. In addition to the 15 recommendations that are outlined here for social media and complementary alerting, there are more than 28 best practices combined from social media and complementary alerting strategies that we think will be beneficial to folks that read this report and those public safety officials that are looking to see how that can maximize what they're doing in those arenas and how they fit into the larger alerting environment. Recommendation 1 recommends that the use of iPause be expanded through outreach and education initiatives among practitioners, channel proprietors, organizations that support people with disabilities, limited English proficiency, and other adults, as well as alert vendors. 2 recommends that the FCC, broadcasters, the wireless industry, device manufacturers, alert originators support radio and TV initiatives to complement alerts. It's recommended that the FCC encourage the ongoing volunteer efforts between device manufacturers and the wireless industry to enable FM radio and smartphones to the extent that is commercially viable for all parties. Local broadcasters should also be encouraged to complement the WIA broadcast by providing more information about the alert for the duration of the alert. So whether it is EAS or these new alerting technologies, we still refer people back to media for more information. So that kind of collaboration and partnership is important. To that end, we recommend that the FCC convene a panel of experts, including ADIS, alert originators, device manufacturers, wireless industry, to study the potential for leveraging television into improved accessibility to emergency public information and alerts. 3 recommends that the alert originators and other entities communicate with each other and their stakeholders when alerts are issued. Emergencies don't happen in silos, and really big disasters really don't confine themselves to single jurisdictions. One possible avenue for this collaboration is through the iPause COG-to-COG system. A COG is a collaborative operating group, a term used in iPause to designate organizations responsible for coordinating emergency management or incident response activities. While that's encouraged, we've seen that really hasn't taken off as much as it should at the local level, so we're encouraging that. And also be cognizant that while they are formed by government, private sector representatives may also be part of COG.
Do you see the COGs as something that should be alluded to or included in the state emergency communications coordinator state plans?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there are some of these recommendations that include putting that in the EAS plans. One, to raise awareness, but also the education of those values. Those COGs are really important, especially when you got into complex multi-jurisdictional environments. Harris County, for example, if we issue an alert, it's going in the 10th largest media market. If the city of Houston within Harris County issues an alert, it tends to come up in the entire region in Harris as well. So those COGs play a critical role to communicate what's being alerted, so those surrounding organizations can respond effectively to those alerts and either enhance that alert or sort of clarify that alert for their particular jurisdiction.
And I imagine, as we go electronic with the state plans, which we'll ultimately do, I'm sure, that the definition of a participating COG and the membership in that COG within a given state, that would need to be fairly dynamic, right? You don't want to limit it to every time the state plan is updated.
Correct.
You want a COG to be able to be stood up, but also be recognized in a way that is publicly available.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
4 recommends that the FCC collaborate with ADIS, alert originators, CMSPs, and other stakeholders to develop internationally accepted and promoted symbols for communicating types of alerts. This is something that's actually already being worked on. These symbols should use a consistent framework and treatment structure specific to the symbols for public alerts and warnings. They should be free of any language-specific text and be easily understood by broad populations. And the adopted symbols should be aligned with the current work being done by the DHS Geospatial Management Office's existing symbology efforts, and this is sort of captures some of the things that they're working on. 5 recommends that the FCC include concepts presented in this report in its agenda for the IPAWS subcommittee to the National Advisory Council as established by the IPAWS System Modification Warning Act of 2015. That has, I think, still yet to take shape, but I think these kind of leverage opportunities would do well for them to explore. 6 recommends that FEMA publish and aggressively distribute best practice documents that support leveraging concepts recommended here, including best practices for leveraging alerting channels and IPAWS training course IS-27, and encourage the inclusion of complementary alerting concept in state EAS plans. 7 recommends that the FCC support FEMA's efforts to strengthen IPAWS infrastructure. The IPAWS infrastructure should ensure a fully robust, redundant, and highly available system of systems for rapid dissemination of public information and warning in response to man-made or natural disasters. 8 recommends that public safety agencies who are beginning to build and release their own non-WIA public safety apps be encouraged to develop minimally viable solutions that are CAP compliant and integrate easily into other platforms for sharing of information. Basically, in trying to keep up with the fast pace of technology, public safety organizations are developing their own public safety apps. And one of the lessons learned out there, sometimes they bite a little bit more than they can chew. And really this concept of getting the minimal viable product out in the market for their constituents gives those constituents something in hand. If they do it CAP compliant, then that makes it easier for that to interact with other platforms, and then they can build on that, and that allows them to also incrementally add new technologies and make those apps relevant by starting out with that minimally viable product.
Yeah, just because it's all about where you sit, right? On my commute alone, I transit through 6 jurisdictions, each with their own alerting app. Right. And I think that's a really important point that's not immediately obvious. Perhaps if you're in a big county like Harris County that covers most of your commute, but where there are seams, and it's really important.
Yeah, and hopefully that will not only save folks money after they're trying to do this, but also let them get something out there and something they can build on as they move along.
Yeah, it's not that it wouldn't, and just to make sure I understand, it's not that each of the jurisdictions wouldn't have their own app, but the part of the app that does the alerting would be a minimal viable solution that would then be interoperable, so that you don't have to download all the jurisdictions to necessarily receive relevant alerts.
Correct, and that's another added value of that, sort of making it CAT compliant. They can talk to each other. Sometimes when they build these apps, they sort of leave that out just because they're being sold something super shiny that may not be still basic enough to do a lot of things.
Okay, thank you.
9 recommends that social media platforms be integrated into other alerting technologies. Technology integration of social media into one-touch solutions is another thing to consider, but would necessitate algorithmic improvements to the status of identified alerts on native social media platforms. Increased integration of alerts could amplify security and public safety issues should an alerting system be compromised. 10 recommends that the FCC investigate potential improvements in the manner in which alerts are digested by complementary alerting platforms. An IPAWS application interface, such as one that uses CAP, for example, as we just discussed, focuses on standardizing ways that social media applications can then receive that information and manipulate those WIA data points in a way that allows them to then display the app. Similarly, non-handset APIs can be developed by technology developers to customize how social media users receive alerts. 11 recommends that the FCC and FEMA encourage alert originators, software programmers, and designers to work toward better procedural integration of Emergency Operations Center and public information practices. 12 recommends that alert originators, alerting software programmers, and designers gear their platforms toward a holistic messaging strategy. 13 recommends that policymakers support alert originators. FEMA through EMI should provide training and other material resources to help develop context-specific local procedures and policies. Some alerting organizations will have the capacity to build robust in-house social media use, while others will be more dependent on outside resources such as citizen volunteers and media organizations. And 14 recommends that key knowledge gaps be addressed through future CSRIC working groups. And some of these might include how to monitor and report on location-specific changes to media environments that impact crisis communication and how that occurs, and also evaluating social media as a complementary infrastructure. Local and regional response organizations and media organizations are increasingly reliant on social media platforms in crisis because their web presence may not be able to handle traffic on those large-scale crises. And finally, recommendation 15 recommends that the FCC coordinate with ADIS to convene a panel of experts, including CMSPs, FEMA, alert originators, device manufacturers, wireless industry, and other WIA stakeholders to conduct a study of the impact of using social media complementary alerting techniques on commercial mobile network congestion. And a couple of items for potential further discussion would be how social media and other channels can improve the communication of emergency public information to non-English speaking and functional access needs communities. And a panel of experts from the alerting community, mass notification system developers, and others who may have expertise should be convened to identify and review best practices and technology for devising and implementing a system of dashboards that enable one-step alert distribution via multiple channels. That is, how can we press the send button once rather than one single time for each of the platforms that are out there as those continue to grow. And that's our report on social media and complementary alerting.
Great. Thank you, Francisca. So at this time, if there's any questions on Report 1, which is on social media and complementary alerting methods for Francisco or Farouk. If you could turn your tent card up. Okay. Any questions on the phone? Okay. I guess we'll go to a vote on that. All in favor of approving the recommendations for the social media and complementary alerting methods, please say yay.
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 All opposed? Congratulations, Working Group 2, that is approved.
Thank you.
Next up is their second report, which will be on the geo-targeting and offer many-to-one capabilities.
So again, a roster of a pretty diverse set of skill sets that contributed to this report. In terms of objectives, we were tasked with providing recommendations on how to best encourage the use of emergency alerts by state and local officials at the local geo-targeting level, as well as including leveraging different alerting platforms and coordination of information flow, not only from many to one to many, but also many to one. The working group drafted the recommendations in the following areas from geo-targeting and many-to-one communication systems, and we submitted that on April 26th. Again, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, we took the opportunity for recent events to sort of inform our discussions and glean opportunities for recommendations there as well. One of the biggest things that we asked to do was to define best approximate, and we defined it sort of as it is now, and then later in the report what we'd like to see sort of as the aspirational definition for best approximate. As it is now, it is highly dependent on topography, density of cell towers, and environmental conditions, including time of day. In densely populated cities, the alert is broadcast to nearly all of the actual alert area due to high density of cell towers, which broadcasts the alert. Anecdotal information suggests that alert broadcasts may reach locations up to about 2 miles outside the actual alert area. In suburban areas, typically small pockets with limited to or no cell coverage where WIA does not reach those areas. Anecdotal information suggests that alert broadcasts may reach locations up to about 5 miles outside the actual alert area. In rural areas, there's a greater number of areas with limited or no cell coverage where WIA does not reach those areas. Essentially, best approximate right now is not a one-size-fits-all concept and varies due to natural and technical issues. While this is accurately sort of portrays where we are now, it does also make a case for improving granularity, and we'll discuss in some of those recommendations how we propose to get there. Additional findings, before we get to the recommendations, is the FCC should adopt expanded message capacity as recommended by CSRIC 4 in order to accommodate nearly all future enhancements. That's one of those things, that's one of those shorter-term fixes, and with more characters, you might actually be able to better describe an alerting area, as well as provide additional information. And that message granularity must be improved in order to help build system trust among the alert originators and the public, and that a balance must be established between the capability and impacts to technology within the network, mobile devices, and operating systems, along with the desires of alert originators. Recommendation 1 is what we believe should be the aspirational definition of best approximate. So we recommend that the FCC modify existing county level down to cell level, with best approximate then being defined as covering much of the alert originator specified polygon as possible, with minimal overshoot or undershoot, given the technical challenges posed by cell site topology and RF propagation. There are opportunities beyond cell broadcasts, such as device-assisted alerting, that may lead to improvements in WIA precision as technology develops and changes. We believe this definition should be revisited regularly to account for changes in that technology. ADIS should also develop best practices to help add some clarity on what the reasonable expectations are from alert originators, so we know what realistically is going to happen once we press send. So that's our part on that. And the public community, the safety community, strongly believes that the aspirational definition of best approximate should be defined as 100% of the target area, with no more than a tenth of a mile overshoot.
That's beyond any polygon boundary, a tenth of a mile beyond any of those
yes,
boundaries.
Sir.
Yeah. And plus or minus a tenth on either side?
Yes, sir. It is recommended that alert originators define the granularity of alert areas using vertices with 2 to 5 decimal places, depending on the nature of the hazard. And as we get there to sort of drawing those polygons, what this basically says, alert originators should be more cognizant of that. And as they draw those polygons, as we have, is now where best approximate is, and we hope to where it will be. When we draw those polygons, we should do that a little smarter as alert originators. So once we have a better assessment of where we are when we press the send button, we should understand there's a difference in terms of the polygon that we're drawing based on the hazard. It might be we should maybe draw it larger for some hazards and narrower from some hazards. So understanding how to use those decimal places is going to become increasingly important on the alert originator side, not only for the trust of that message, but also, quite honestly, to place less demand on the network. We don't want to overload it when we don't have to.
Francisco, is it aspirational then to have beyond polygons, and maybe polygons are sufficient, I don't know, I'm looking for some feedback from you, to be able to point to some category of objects as boundaries, so that you'd be able to check the footprint of a building and ensure that the alert is delivered in the building, but not too far beyond the building. Is it sufficient to do that with polygons, or should ultimately this include the ability to select typical categories of objects?
So that's where the decimal place become important. For example, a second decimal place provides for a resolution of 1.1 kilometers, which separates one town from the next. Mm-hmm. If you get all the way down, for example, to 4 decimal places, that's a resolution of 11 meters, which can identify a parcel of land that's comparable to a typical accuracy of uncorrected GPS. If you could get to 5 decimal places, I'm not convinced that we can get there. That might be helpful for places like New York that really need to do that one block area or possibly one building. So that's also another reason we brought some of those technology folks, those vendors to the table to be part of these discussions as we do that to inform our dialogue.
Okay.
And recommendation 3 is probably one of the most substantive recommendations in the report. It recommends that the FCC collaborate with ADIS, CMSPs, alert originators, geo-targeting experts, device manufacturers, and other subject matter experts to conduct, research, and develop standards and implement systems that support enhanced geo-targeting and allow device operating systems and device applications to do the following. Identify methods to transmit the polygon coordinates to the mobile device using cell broadcast, while supporting the legacy WIA systems for existing deployed devices, as well as under newer enhanced WIA service for new devices. The methods should be standardized internationally to support roaming. Also identify changes needed to cell broadcast to allow a received cell broadcast message containing the coordinates to be passed on to an OS or device-based WIA application. Changes need to be made on an international basis to support roaming. Understanding the full impacts of the network. Use the polygon of the alert area embedded in the WIA message to help the device determine if it's inside the alert area. If the device is determined to be inside the alert area, then it should be rendered on the device depending on the configuration of the user location and alert preferences on the mobile device. In the event that the device is unable to obtain location information as described within a predetermined amount of time, to be on the safe side, the alert is displayed on the device in plain text. And also to render the alert on a compatible devices in a manner that provides a map clearly illustrating the alert area, the location of the device if known, and any additional relevant life safety information depending on the configuration of the user location and alert preferences on the device. And also finally on this, I think a point, Admiral, that you had raised, to provide an archive of the alert so that WIA recipients may reference any relevant previous message content. And again, those, in my opinion, those sort of device-based solutions are where the future of WIA is. By offloading the work, whether it is define better granularity or improved content, is essential to keeping WIA in step with the state of emerging and new technologies. Rather than expecting cell broadcast to do things it was not designed to do, it can then be used to tell the device what to do to achieve better outcomes.
And it strikes me it's not a one way or the other way, right? It's the synergy between the two. For example, that map that you'd want to display, maybe it's evacuation routes in advance of a hurricane. It may be that sending that to devices when there's a high likelihood of an emergency occurring, that you could send something in the background that then is referred to so that the device has that preloaded. But that would really be a mix of the networks themselves, the devices being able to store such a preloaded useful feature, and then the location element that says, am I in the applicable area to where that preloaded feature would be useful.
Right. There was also some discussion in the group of those sort of hybrid solutions, and there's a part in the dependency that sort of talks about some of those things. But just being able to leverage both of those is really good.
Which then I think reinforces your recommendation that we should be meeting more regularly with the stakeholders outside the CSRIC, but with the FEMA, FCC engagement envisioned with the IPOS Act.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
That also you'll see on the recommendations when we sort of outline working groups to work on something. It's really a broader set of stakeholders that we're recommending. It's device manufacturers, alert originators, device manufacturers, and things like that to be part of those discussions. 4 recommends that the FCC expedite modifying 47 CFR 10.430, which is a character limit as follows. Alert message processed by participating CMS provider must not exceed 90 characters of alphanumeric text for 2G and 3G, and 360 characters of alphanumeric text for 4G, LTE, and later technologies. 5 recommends that the FCC collaborate with ADIS to lead a development group comprising of CMSPs, alert originators, FEMA, device manufacturers, OS providers, and other subject matter experts to create a set of minimum specifications for an enhanced, secured, and trusted, standards-based, CMSP-controlled WIA mobile device app which can be developed, tested, and deployed under strict guidelines adopted by CMSPs and their device manufacturers and OS providers, and not modifiable by the consumer, while maintaining CMSP control of the customer experience and in order to ensure high-level support. Defining the requirements needs to take into consideration impacts to the alert originators, FEMA, and the network. It needs to identify backwards compatibility, identify standards implications both for ADIS and also globally, define back-end applications, and develop a timeline for completing the above tasks, including a timeline for deployment across new capable handsets on participating CMSP networks once new infrastructure and new capable handsets are available. So the difference really between, they may sound similar, between 3 and 5, or really this is an app and the other one, and 3 really references the operating system. Recommendation 6 is that the FCC collaborate with ADIS to convene, within 6 months of the adoption of this report, a public-private partnership comprised of the wireless industry, device manufacturers, academics, and alert originators to further the concept of many-to-one outside WIA regulatory framework. While many-to-one is acknowledged to be outside the current CMSP obligations with regards to WIA, we recognize its importance and its value, and all stakeholders agree that the investigation of that is beneficial. 7 recommends that within 18 months of this report by the CSRIC, the FCC collaborate with ADIS and CTIA to study and evaluate potential back-end mechanisms to passively collect data and share geofenced usage data with emergency management stakeholders. And so by passively collect that, it's sort of Superstorm Sandy would have been a good example, where you might have drawn a polygon or issued an alert for this area at 8 a.m. for an evacuation. And that passive collection would allow you to say, and just throwing out numbers, for example, 10,000 devices received that alert. If 12 hours later you then issued that alert again to evacuation, but only 2,000 devices received that alert, then you know the evacuation is going at a certain pace.
Yeah, and it would just be immensely capable, as you immensely useful for communities dealing with disasters. And again, I'll pull from the Louisiana recent tragedy. How much time was spent looking for any survivors or stranded people in an area? Anything that allows first responders to narrow down their search for people into the most likely areas where there would be remaining individuals, that many back to one, which is just one more example of how that rapid triage would be very useful in optimizing the finite set of dispatchable resources for communities.
Yeah, and that was one of those key discussions that came up from alert originators and especially emergency managers, was the ability to be able to collect that data to make more informed decisions about where to deploy those critical resources so that they do the most good. 8 recommends that the FCC request that ADIS develop standards enabling the inclusion of URLs in WIA messages if determined to be feasible by studies that are currently underway. And items for further discussion, WIA is voluntary, and the FCC may want to consider whether it's necessary to outline a mechanism to effect withdrawals from folks that may want to opt out of the system from the CMSP side. That the FCC should consider convening a panel of subject matter experts from the alert originator community, wireless providers, academia, researchers, and device manufacturers to consider what the next generation of WIA, we sort of called it WIA 2.0, what that might look like. It's been 8 years since this program started. The ecosystem is much different today than it was now, but this might be a good time to try to have a group think a little more forward and beyond just what's immediately here in front of us to see what WIA 2.0 might look like and things that we may want to consider.
Yeah, and I'd like to flip that, certainly it is voluntary, and we would hope that there wouldn't be a provider that would seek to withdraw, but we clearly need a mechanism if that's the case. I'd also like to look at any barriers to participation. This has been such a win-win, and the wireless industry has been so wonderful in this that I have every confidence that we're going to continue to work with them to improve capabilities, and would look for ideas on how to, where there are a few outliers and smaller providers, what can we do to actually increase participation, because it has such value for communities.
And the last item for further discussion potentially would be to consider how new technologies can be coupled with WIA to serve the functional and access needs community. Chairman and Admiral, those are our recommendations by consensus. I think with a lot of painstaking effort, sort of, if here's where we want to be, how do we get there, which is some great work between the alert originators and the engineer side of the House. I hope you noticed some of those had some ambitious timelines as you read that report, which brings up this particular discussion. One of the things that we do not have now coming forward at the end of this month is the Commission will meet to potentially take action on some WIA items, which is going to sort of could potentially create new improvements that will have to be worked on, which could sort of makes us take a second look at where we are in timelines and how they might fit with that. So before we open it up, if you don't mind, to comments and amendments, I'll sort of turn it over to Brian Joseph, who has a friendly amendment on timelines that we can consider at the appropriate time, but just to give us some idea of how we would manage that.
There we go. Okay, thanks. And thank you, Francisco and Farouk. I at the outset want to note, the tremendous effort and a lot of good work that went into the report today, and we really acknowledge and applaud that. As Francisco said, there was just, I think, some observation about the ambitious timelines, but one that we think could be, easily addressed with a friendly amendment. And so I wanted to make a motion to add just two sentences to the beginning of Section 9 that contains the recommendations, and I'll read that language and happy to field any questions. So I think we would propose adding the following language. The working group recognizes that many of the proposed enhancements from both CSRIC 4 and CSRIC 5 will necessarily be interrelated and raise questions regarding the timing for coordinated development and implementation. We emphasize that the timelines provided in the report and recommendations represent estimated targets, but actual timelines should be flexible and informed by the deliberations of the groups referenced in these recommendations.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to add to the beginning of Section 9 an amendment. Do we have a second?
I'd like to second it from Verizon, and I also would like to congratulate the team. You did some great work here, and there's great ideas. A lot of it's there's very aspirational things. You might as well go big or not go at all, right? So that's good. But what you're proposing here is really a big re-engineering of the whole system, and why certain things make sense on the face of it, other things are going to need a lot of work and coordination between a lot of different people, and we think we need time to work those things out. Otherwise, we get a system maybe of unintended consequences. All right, so I would second the proposal from my colleague here.
Okay, so we'll move forward with voting on the amendment that's been proposed on the floor. After the voting, we will then go into a question and answer on the rest of the recommendations. So all in favor of approving the amended language for the beginning of Section 9, please say yay.
Yay. Yay.
All opposed? All right, congratulations. The amendment has been accepted. Are there any questions on the broader recommendations for Working Group 2? Andy.
Also like to compliment yourself and the working group on the work that has gone into this. I do have 4 questions, so I'll apologize for that. So the first one is we talked about the margin of error that was acceptable sort of being negotiated at 0.1 mile. And that seemed somewhat arbitrary depending on the size of the polygons you might be discussing. If you're looking at a polygon that's 50 to 100 miles across, that seems like a very tight window of tolerance. But if you have a polygon that's the shape of a building, 0.1 miles is a really loose tolerance. So was there discussion of varying having some sort of variability on that tolerance, or is that being driven by some other technical constraint?
So that's what we chose to define best approximated as it is now, and then which does deal with some of those issues, and then where we would like the aspirational sort of where we put the field post. And as we get towards the aspirational, that's sort of where we think bringing in things like being able to send the polygon to the device and let the device determine where it's at, it really improves that accuracy. And I think the groups that are outlined here to work on those issues will be solving that. We think it's reachable. We want to make sure that it's done also in the larger global sense of all of those things. And again, that's aspirational. I mean, I think if you tell me, alert originator, I can draw a polygon in Harris County and it's a quarter of a mile rather than a tenth in terms of how it really gets there, I have a lot more comfort with that than right now not knowing where it would go.
I would just offer along those lines that the target accuracy in the 911 location order is 50 meters. And so that might be, rather than just capriciously select a tenth of a mile, it may be useful to align with a threshold that by rule is already communicated and on the books. And or that's a backstop for dispatchable location. And buildings really are objects that will become increasingly described electronically in maps for communities, so that it actually may be easier to just click on the building and have the boundaries that correlate to device-based alerting. So I would associate with the comment and perhaps suggest that well, not to take away from the tenth as a useful guidepost, but that you consider other ways of describing that desired accuracy.
Thanks. Second question. Was there any discussion around the coordination of adjacent polygons? I think the Admiral gave the case of, as you're driving through neighboring counties, who might both be issuing the same alert for polygons that overlap. So was there discussion for ways to standardize so that a device could receive those two alerts and present something more sane to the user than two completely separate alerts? If you happen to be driving down 95, you're crossing counties, and there's a tornado or derecho warning coming through, could you just get one derecho warning? Was there any conversation about that?
Yeah, and that's even that's a discussion, unfortunately, that we tend to have in emergency management a lot, especially in those complex multi-jurisdictions. Harris County has 32 cities in it, plus 54 fire departments. No, 56. I don't know what the extra two came from recently, but 56. And more than 125 law enforcement agencies. And that was sort of our concern. And the reason we're talking about more about granularity and it really increased in priority for us was initially, until some of those issues got resolved, the initial authorization to become an alert originator was supposed to be by FIPS code, so by county level. But because demand, alert originators smaller than a county were starting to get the authorization. So that really is what increased the need from our perspective to talk about granularity more and the precision of those polygons. That's also sort of where we go back to, while it's in the social media report, that's where those cogs, and in essence, really it needs to be, well, we don't have a formal agreement in Harris County. We've got 3 alert originators, ourselves, Chambers County, and the city of Baytown and Houston, so 4 of us, which theoretically could warn in the same area, even though we didn't want to. That's why really that communication is imperative and that collaboration and that communicating. So we ideally want to tell our partners when we're going to communicate something first. But again, that really comes to local folks being able to manage that and have those things work in their community. Because even then, the National Weather Service, aside from local emergency management or public safety, most of the alerts that are distributed are by the National Weather Service, which could affect someone commuting from one area to the other.
Okay. Third one, thank you for that.
My pleasure.
There's a comment about the over-targeting being academic, and I see that from a technical perspective. Did you give any consideration to whether the FCC or local jurisdictions should engage in auditing of the use of the emergency alerting systems? And I'm going to argue by anecdote, and I will comment that multiple anecdotes are not data. I was in Las Vegas a couple months ago, and at 4 a.m. the emergency alerting system was being used for Amber Alerts. Right, so I didn't get a lot of great sleep. That's an example of an over-targeting that's not a technical problem. And I'm very concerned, about the overuse of systems like this causing users to opt out. So was that outside the scope of what you were looking at, or did you consider and discard that?
I think that's another example of why we want to, as alert originators, not talking for the full group, but as alert originators, want improved granularity. Our concerns, Harris County, 1,777 square miles. I could have serious flooding, and we did this year in the northwest quadrant, and the rest of the county is bone dry. So an alert that goes to everybody starts to become a little overwarning. And so that, I think, the improved accuracy so that it only goes to people that are really in that imminent threat. Not only are you getting the right folks, not over alerting, but you're also building confidence in the people that get that alert because they're being impacted by what you're warning them about. And so over alerting, I think, is something that I know a lot of emergency managers that have very active approaches towards public warnings and alerts do really worry about that. And it's something that on a daily basis with the current mass notification systems we have now, aside from even then is a challenge.
Yeah, Andy, I would note that there is an open docket on this, and a record that includes exploration of alert fatigue and device and/or network future functionality that would give users greater choices with regard to when they would receive a given alert, as well as what type of alert. So in the example that you used in Las Vegas, and thank you for not being on the casino floor at 4 a.m, that you could elect to cache that potential. It would be in the realm of the this kind of functionality. But there's an open docket on that, and we'd love to continue to have people populate that.
Great. And to that point, I think this is also important, is we also understand a larger ecosystem. One of the things that I worry about as an alert originator is people looking at WIA as their free mass notification system. Right. It should not be that. There are various platforms which people can have received alerts and warnings, whether it's locally purchased mass notification systems, social media, broadcast, EAS, all of those things, and the appropriate platform or sets of platforms should be used to alert based on that risk and threat. People automatically using WIA for every hazard can be problematic. It is intrusive. It's designed to be that way because it meet a certain threshold. So even at meeting a certain threshold, we do have those concerns about over alerting, but it should also be used at the appropriate time for the appropriate sort of risk and hazard, and not just be used as a free mass notification system.
I agree completely, which is why I just asked the question about auditing as a control to ensure that less conservative alert originators are brought to task. Because my worry is that if I go to one jurisdiction and somebody overuses it, I turn it off and I forget to turn it on. When I'm in Harris County, I might not find out about some of that flooding.
And that's an excellent point, because right now that's certainly something a challenge, but I think, again, anecdotal evidence, not data. When we see the number of people that have the alerting authority that haven't used it, and as we hear from those, it's because they don't think it's granular enough.
Right.
As you improve the granularity, that could be a real problem, and that's something worth studying as well in terms of how you get people to utilize that asset responsibly.
Okay. And then my final question is, in recommendation 5, when it discusses the client, one thing's called out there is not modifiable by the user, and I wonder why that was important enough to make it into the recommendation. While I understand that many of the providers will probably make them not modifiable by the user, the internet has been amazingly successful because people are able to modify existing technologies and improve on them and possibly solve the adjacent polygon problem on their own. So why was it perceived as important to sort of mandate that not be a capability?
Well, one, I think I'll refer to anybody that was on the working group that can talk about that. Sort of, as alert originators, we wanted sort of, the recommendation 3 was, the operating system. Yep. Recommendation 5, you're talking about sort of an app that would live on a future phone at some point that would help to sort of do all of these things. Security issues, other things like that, and we really relied on the expertise of folks at industry and the engineers, how that could not only work successfully but also securely. So aside from those issues, I mean, that sort of, if they're sort of going to be the lead on that app. Certainly, we relied on that expertise for them to do that. And I mean, the alert originator side, it seems sense not to make it manipulatable by someone that's on the device. I think that opens up a whole can of worms.
And I would offer, Andy, that one of the reasons why there is a codification of WIA rules for what is a voluntary program to participate in is to ensure there's a degree of consistency in use and the standardized approach, carrier to carrier to carrier, alert originator. But your point's well taken. How do we accommodate, unleash the fullest innovation in the future? And I think it's probably something worthy of more study.
Okay.
Great. Gary, question?
Yes, and in part, some of this has been addressed. First, great job.
Thank you.
Next, are you anticipating that some of these alerts, especially when they have a high degree of granularity, will be within the WIA system ecosystem only? Or are you anticipating that a COG would do a WIA alert and an EAS alert at the same time, where EAS has no granularity? And so you have a station with a 100-mile radius that is getting an alert for 1 square mile that's at the edge of their broadcast area, and yet everybody's getting that alert. And the reason I have this concern is I met recently with the National Weather Service representative in Salt Lake. As a storm cell moves, every 10 miles, the Weather Service's responsibility is to send a new alert. And so if you have a broadcast entity that is serving multiple counties, and you have a storm cell that's getting a new alert, now that doesn't come out as a duplicate, but it comes out as a new alert. As a storm cell moves every 10 miles, over the course of an hour, you can have 10, 12, 15 fresh warnings that an automated system would be instructed to rebroadcast. Now, when you look at the getting really granular with a WIA alert, if it's also going out as an EAS alert, now we open the door to having the same kind of an issue where we have no way to filter duplicates when they're all originated as fresh alerts because the storm cells moved. And thus you develop listener fatigue. People turn off the radio because they don't want to hear nonstop EAS. And then you dilute the system. It becomes ineffective. So have you considered whether your alert originators would alert within the WIA ecosystem only, or would this be part of a broader multi delivery methodology scheme, and how can we serve the public, get the data back that you're looking for so you can focus your emergency efforts where they need to be, and yet not tune out or have people become inured to these alerts?
From good news and bad news, so that is a significant problem for emergency managers. Like I say, it's not predominantly my problem, and I'm not trying to be flippant, but because of the National Weather Service, that is a problem for them. Most emergency management coordinators will defer to the NWS to use their systems to alert for warnings. We'll only step in with the public safety response has to be modified in somehow in response to the weather. But I think right now, if it's still as it was about 2 years ago, National Weather Service has certain things they have to do once something meets a warning. And so sometimes you will get a 4 a.m. message for a flash flood watch or warning that's only going to last 15 minutes in your area because the storm is moving at 10 or 15 miles an hour and it'll be out of there. Not speaking for NWS, but it seems to me giving more local control to those National Weather Service offices to be able to make decisions that aren't decisions based to what's actually happening, not by mandatory thresholds, would seem a way to sort of help to mitigate that. And then further than that, there are some thresholds that they might need to have but don't. During the derecho storms, their threshold didn't allow them to issue those alerts, and it wasn't required, even though those particular storms from the public safety side had severe public safety implications. So that's, for example, where we as alert originators in Harris County had said, if you ever find yourself in that situation where you don't have the threshold to issue an alert, but you think it's important enough weather, then we as emergency management, you can reach out to us and we'll issue those alerts, even though it's not necessarily what would normally be something that we warn for.
Yeah, and just some points of clarification. The charter, the task for the working group was defined around wireless emergency alerts, not the larger EAS categories. And what Francisco described was an issue in Louisiana, as the National Weather Service is very organized around hurricane alerts, but it's the local weather service when it's not a hurricane, and we're working with FEMA on looking at that in an after action for alerting. But I would also offer, Gary, that you certainly describe appropriately an action we would not want to have occur, right? We wouldn't want to generate that listener fatigue, and it's not just fatigue, right? It often would then get in the way of very useful information about what to do, because you're yet again getting the attention signal. But Francisco's in an area right now in Harris County and Dana Golub and some of the smart folks, both at NAB, both in radio and TV, are making me smarter and smarter about what's going on in data casting, right? In Harris County right now today, they will data cast to an entire broadcast region and encode that so that it only is recognizable by endpoints that they want it to be recognizable for. So every receiver gets it, but it only pops up and is recognizable by the intended receivers. Well, that could also be intended receivers within a geographic boundary. So if you think ATSC 3.0 going into device-aware or location-aware devices, you could see that, oh, yeah, we could do greater granularity than we can do today on both radio and television broadcast. So, yes, we want to be very carefully as we tread forward here. No, this isn't part of the charter that we're looking at for recommendations here, but we do want to follow up on appropriately outlining aim points, if you will, for where granularity may have a broadcast relevance, but I think it's work still to be done.
The commission, based on what we did in our last meeting with the submarine cables, and then we we'll talk about that, I think, later today. The commission serves as kind of the ombudsman or the focal point for coordinating between different entities. The Weather Service is just one example, but where what you're doing would work extremely well is in the case of, say, a chlorine gas, and as the chlorine cloud moves,
a plume that's
or an active shooter that's mobile, things like that, where that granularity could really be focused, or flooding. But where we do have the issues with other agencies, and this I'm directing this now to you, Admiral, does the commission have a role, or should the commission have a role in helping to mitigate that so that we can get good usage of WEA and not overburden those entities that have less granularity?
Yes, I think we do. We've got convening authority, which is very useful. We've got enduring and very valuable interagency relationships with FEMA and DHS. in this regard in the Weather Service, and we'll continue to follow up on those. And I also want to, again, associate with Andy's comment on a very positive role for auditing, and part of that open docket includes an element in the ETRS, the EAS test reporting system, an ability to receive feedback on alerting that can be easily correlated to, well, who was the alert originator and what were the alerting resources used. So, yes, we see that we have a role in facilitating both the strategic as well as the tactical feedback loop.
There's no more questions in the room. Are there any questions on the phone?
Yes, this is Bill Smith from PayPal. I'm curious, and it may be that I just missed it, but are these alerts sort of, instantaneous and do not have a time to live? The reason I ask is, as we increase the accuracy and decrease the size of the warning, it is entirely possible that one could be outside the warning area when the alert is issued, move into the warning area, and does not receive an alert. So I'm just curious if that has been considered, and I apologize if it has.
Yeah, my understanding is, I'm curious to chime in, I think if you're driving into an alert area, I think that continues to broadcast it during the alert time. Is that?
Yeah. Oh, so there is the alert is broadcast. Mm-hmm. I am not in the area, the local area. I may come in from a plane ride. When I enter the area, if that, as an example, if there's a tornado watch for between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m., will I receive the alert when I enter the area or not?
Yes, it's a teleservice. What's called? Yes, you'll receive the alert.
Yeah. So both in today's system and also, as I understand, the device-based or device-assisted granularity, the devices would receive alerts in a much larger area and only display those for which they're now in the polygon. Now I see it. So having it resident, it will have been received in the device. If the device then goes inside the boundaries of the polygon, in that device-assisted granularity, it should then say, I'm qualifying for this alert, display it. Is that?
Yeah, none of the recommendations are trying to manipulate that sort of that procedure right now. We're just sort of defining the granularity is what we're trying to do with the device, so they would still receive the alert.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the phone? All right, if not, we will go to vote on the second report by Working Group 2, the new amended report on the geo-targeting and many-to-one capabilities. All in favor say yay.
Yay.
All opposed? Congratulations. Both of your recommendations have been approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia.
Okay, we want to move on to Working Group 3, Emergency Alert Systems. Both of our co-chairs, Steve Johnson and Kelly Williams, are on the phone. So I'll move forward in the slides. Kelly and Steve, if you can take it forward. The slides are just now being presented.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. This is Steve Johnson. I am the co-chair with Kelly Williams. Kelly is representing the National Association of Broadcasters. I represent the National Cable and Telecommunications Association. I'm very pleased to be with you today to deliver the Working Group 3 report. Working Group 3 is focused on emergency alert system more toward the traditional cable television broadcaster and other video and audio delivering mechanisms. Next slide, please. Our topics this morning, the first topic is the review the background of Working Group 3, our objectives, deliverables, membership. Second is the status update on where we are today. And third and finally is the EAS multilingual report and recommendations. Next slide. The Working Group 3 objectives, we were charged with making recommendations to the Commission for the improvement of and development of EAS as a secure and effective alerting tool for the American public. And we had 3 subcategories that we were charged with addressing. The first one is improving EAS security. The second one is provisioning EAS in languages other than English. And third was developing and updating the operational handbooks for EAS participants. Next slide. The detail on those subcategories, on the security, the goals were to assess industry awareness of EAS security best practices adopted by CSRIC 4. Secondly, to assess barriers to implementing security best practices. And third, to create recommendations to implement best practices. Under multilingual EAS, we were to assess the state of multilingual alerting and to recommend best practices for the delivery of multilingual emergency communications. And third, on EAS handbooks, we were charged with updating the document to reflect rule and procedure changes and to create an effective tool for EAS participants. Next slide. Our deliverables were as follows. The EAS security, we presented our report and it was approved in March of 2016. The updated handbook was presented and approved in CSRIC meeting in June of 2016. And our multilingual EAS report is finalized and is being presented today for approval. Next slide. The next 2 slides here are the alphabetical list of the members of Working Group 3. And I'd like to thank a few folks in particular. Greg Cook from the FCC is our FCC liaison. He's been very helpful in the process. Jim Dubois is the multilingual co-chair. Next slide. Lorian McDonald is the other multilingual co-chair. Gary Smith was our security chair. Gary Kim was our handbook chair. And Kelly Williams and myself are the Work Group 3 co-chairs. I'd like to thank our subgroup chairs for doing fine work and helping us get to where we are today. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the work progress on the deliverables, the security report was completed in March. The EAS handbook report was completed in June. And the multilingual EAS report is completed and being submitted today. Next slide. Today's report is being submitted for your approval, and we'll go through the scope of the report. We were to recommend the best practices for delivery of multilingual EAS and emergency communications. And we did this through a series of weekly and bi-weekly meetings where the subgroup met and had significant discussions on the topic of multilingual EAS. Our report is based on the discussions among the experts in EAS in these weekly and bi-weekly meetings and discussions with state organizations. We also based it on anecdotal information that we had heard about in our groups. We discovered that there was a lack of consensus on best practices. Multilingual EAS is growing, but still in an infant stage at this time. Unfortunately, the deployment has been minimal, but this is in the process of changing. Some states are making great efforts in progressing down the path of providing multilingual alerts. And I think in a few months or time period, there will be much more evidence and a bigger pool to draw from to create a good set of recommended practices, but we don't feel that we're there today. So rather than coming up with recommended practices or best practices, our group decided it was better to come up with some recommendations that would help us clear the way to create best practices that could be assembled and put together sometime in the future. Next slide. Our project team was a very representative group, including EAS participants from the broadcaster side, cable operators, other video and audio providers, also including State Emergency Communication Committee chairs and members, the emergency alert originators, EAS equipment manufacturers, U.S. government such as FEMA and the FCC and National Weather Service as well, and various EAS experts and consultants. Next slide. Communities that have made progress in multilingual EAS trials, the multilingual capacities or capabilities are still in the early stages, and there's too little experience at this time to form best practices. However, we were not able to identify any regulatory barriers in the FCC Rules Part 11. So we found nothing in the rules that would put roadblocks up into developing and deploying multilingual alerting, which was the good news. Next slide. During the course of our work, the FCC issued its report and order EB docket number 04296 on emergency alert. And as part of this report and order, there are some new reporting rules, and hopefully these new requirements will help us get information on the multilingual usage and can help, we can gather information through these reports and use and disseminate that in the future in the form of tips or best practices. Next slide. All crisis really starts at the local level. We heard from the previous working group the importance of targeting the alerts, and it really catches your attention, or it should catch your attention when you're at the local level and the smallest granularity as possible. So with that in mind, each community with guidance from the state and national level is in the best position to address the local needs as far as what languages are spoken to properly alert the citizens in that area. Next slide. The capabilities to support alerts in multiple languages currently exist. We can do dual language in the legacy EAS, and more additional languages are possible in CAP. The challenge remains in creating the content of those multiple languages by the originators. The EAS participants generally do not have the ability to translate alerts into multiple languages. This would require either some type of an automated translating system or having human translators standing by in case of an emergency message. The automated translating approaches are still under development and are not ready to be fully deployed at this time from what we've seen. Next slide. Our recommendations, we felt that it was premature to create additional multilingual alerting regulations. The best approach would be to allow the natural evolution of best practices to develop rather than to force the participants down a particular path. Find out what path works best and then write regulations to help us go down that path. The use of multilingual alerting should remain voluntary for EAS originators and participants. They should be encouraged to use multilingual approaches and to do so with the support of the local communities. which should continue to allow but not require experimentation and development on multilingual functionality with collaborative leadership from local communities. Next slide. Additional recommendations are the local emergency communities are in the best position to determine the usage and the needs regarding the languages to support the local demographics. Government partners should continue to make state and local emergency managers aware of the CAP technology and the capabilities to do multilingual alerts. Alert originators should leverage CAP for its multilingual support. Next slide. The FCC and FEMA should continue to collaborate to keep alerting originators informed of the FCC should encourage the use of existing tools and capabilities to facilitate the delivery of the multilingual alerts on a voluntary basis. And finally, someplace down the future, when we have some more best practices that we can draw from, develop best practices learned from this future experience. Next slide. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the working group, and I'm available for any questions if anybody has any.
So any questions for Working Group 3 on their 9 recommendations? No questions in the room. Are there any questions on the phone?
Hi, this is Kelly. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Kelly.
Oh, great. Thank you. I just want to chime in and thank the two co-chairs of this working group. They were real taskmasters and kept this group moving quickly, and I think we came out with a really good product. So hopefully this will add to the body of knowledge in multilingual alerting.
Okay, so with that, we'll ask the council for a vote on Working Group 3 Multilingual EAS. All those in favor, please say yay.
Yay. Yay.
All opposed? Congratulations, your recommendations have been approved.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'd like to move forward with Working Group 4A. Working Group 4A is our underwater cable resiliency. Kent Bressy and Catherine Chris are our 2 working group chairs. They are providing their final recommendation on geodiversity. After Working Group 4's recommendation, we'll take a short health break, just so that everyone knows there is relief in sight.
Thanks, Teresa. Catherine, do you want to come up as well? It's nice actually to be here in person for this CSRIC meeting to present this. I feel like I'm always in some far-flung part of the planet, but that's the submarine cable industry. So it has been a long process with this working group over actually 2 CSRICs. Originally, these 3 reports were to be delivered during CSRIC 4, and we suddenly realized that it was more than we could possibly handle in a single CSRIC. So we are finally here with our final report, a group of dedicated working group members. I must say with CSRIC 5, I have to offer special thanks to Catherine, my co-chair, for doing the lion's share of the work, particularly with my travel schedule, but also wrangling a lot of the different viewpoints and challenges in this process. So with that, we'd like to talk about what we're addressing in our final report on geographic diversity of routes and landings. And again, this is building on the 2 previous reports, so this report is much shorter than the others, but it is referring back consistently to the content of the first report on spatial separation as a means of risk reduction for submarine cables, and the need for better intergovernmental and interjurisdictional coordination to reduce those risks. Here the focus is very much on promoting network resilience through the use of diverse routes and landings, which is something that the industry itself has long pursued and its customers have wanted as a matter of network design. But there are a lot of other constraints that affect what operators can actually do, as they're not designing the world for themselves. They're operating within a lot of constraints and an increasingly busy marine environment. So in terms of, just skipping ahead here, just to recap our process and our people, unlike some of the other working groups, we operated entirely by phone. We had a far-flung working group with people actually on different continents contributing to this process. Many fewer working group members than a lot of other working groups, and a lot of participation from other federal agencies, which I think is critical. It's helped to start a dialogue within the federal government, certainly, about the need for better marine spatial planning and coordination of activities. There's still an enormous amount that remains to be done. And of course, there are a lot of challenges, which we noted in our last report as well, about the limits of the FCC's own statutory authority. There are lots of recommendations that we would have liked to have made, both in this report and the last report, that we couldn't make because it was not we weren't able to make a recommendation for the FCC to do something that it's actually empowered to do. And so again, we're highlighting the need for the FCC to use its expertise and connections to draw attention to particular issues and to try to collaborate with other agencies at the state, federal, and local levels, recognizing that the FCC in many cases simply can't tell others what to do, much as we wish that were the case. So, the question had arisen with respect to our last report about the limits of the FCC's authority, and we're very cognizant of that. We had a lot of discussions with our recommendations about what we could and couldn't recommend, because there were a lot of recommendations that people wanted to make where we said, well, it's not a recommendation to the Commission that they can act on. So in terms of some of the recommendations here, if it seems limited, that's the reason for it. It's recognizing what the FCC itself can do. So in terms of the content of the report, we reviewed key concepts about geographic diversity and route protection. We described factors influencing the choice of particular routes and landings and made recommendations for further FCC action. So in terms of the factors influencing routes and landings, these include things like economic opportunities and differing costs of particular routes and landings, seafloor topology. There are a lot of marine areas that are simply not attractive, whether they're seismically active, there are seamounts, there are particular seafloor conditions that increase the risk of damage or abrasion to cables and ultimately disruption of communications. Significant regulatory factors, and I think this was one of the main focus areas in terms of our recommendations, is that unwittingly or not, there's a lot of regulatory activity that ends up creating disparities in different regions of the United States, and that increases the attractiveness or lack of attractiveness in going particular places. So if you look at the map that we included in our first report, which unfortunately we didn't include it with our slides today, you see a lot of clustering in Southern California, increasingly in Oregon, Southern Florida, and the New York, New Jersey areas. And while there are certain marine coastal areas that, for example, the Outer Banks of North Carolina, that are potentially very challenging and have not been attractive, there isn't a single cable landing there. There are other areas that might be appealing, for example, other parts of the California coast. But given the extraordinary burdens and costs of permitting in California, and also the multiplicity of national marine sanctuaries, a federal program covering much of the California coast, California has long been viewed as is not attractive but for Hermosa Beach, which, due to a quirk of California history, the locality actually controls the state territorial sea there because of rights that were granted with respect to oil resources back at the beginning of the 20th century. And so it's a combination of the length of the process, the fees that are paid. Sometimes it can resemble more of a budget gap closing exercise than something that actually reflects the cost of the permitting to the local government agency, other mitigation that may be required, and there's just a huge amount of variety of particularly local and state level regulation for infrastructure that is fundamentally of federal importance. And so it highlights some of the complexities of dealing with matters of national importance that are nevertheless subject to very localized regulation. Of course, this isn't entirely unique to the submarine cable industry. The wireless industry has this in spades with wireless tower siting. But the wireless industry also has a statutory provision that deals with how to address potentially those conflicts with a preemption remedy. We don't have that with the submarine cable business and submarine cable regulation. And it's something that we talked about, is there potentially a theory for federal preemption under the Commerce Clause to have the federal government take more control of this process? I think that's a political thicket that we decided we weren't going to get into. Instead, we wanted to make a proposal in terms of transparency to try to put pressure on other agencies at the federal, state, and local levels to try to bring some regularity to this process. In terms of other factors, proximity to other marine infrastructure, we described in our first report the processes that submarine cable operators go through in designing new submarine cable systems, starting with a desktop study and then an actual marine survey of the entire route. Much of that objective is to stay as far away from other potentially damaging marine activities as possible. But if those activities are authorized without any regard to submarine cables can end up being entirely foreclosed from diverse landing options. The final factor we noted was access to terrestrial networks, and this is both for connectivity to other networks and also increasingly as we see over-the-top providers like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, potentially Amazon investing in their own submarine cable infrastructure. They're looking to connect their data centers, and they want proximity to those landings. And so that is also a big influencer for where cables are going to land. In terms of our recommendations, we have 5 principal recommendations that we made. The first is, and it's a similar recommendation in our last report, about encouraging interagency and interjurisdictional cooperation. And in part, this is trying to leverage some of the regional planning body activities that we see across marine industries and across jurisdictions in different regions of the United States. Here in the Mid-Atlantic region, we have the MARCO process. Actually don't have my glasses on, so I'm having trouble reading the second bullet point here. So, but it is really trying to highlight both the lengthy time frames and the fact that disparities in time frames are things that submarine cable operators are very much focused on to see how can they get to market most quickly. Is that necessarily something that we want dictated purely by regulatory conditions? Thank you, Teresa. And so we're interested to see the Commission take a leadership role in highlighting these disparities and how this has resulted in part in some of the clustering that we see to try to streamline the permitting across multiple jurisdictions to reduce some of the disparities. We recognize that we're never going to eliminate it entirely, and that there are particular regional factors that are going to result in differences. But given the extraordinary disparities we see right now, we think there's big room for improvement. The second recommendation is to have the Commission encourage other agencies to consider the impact on submarine cable diversity during the permitting process for other marine activities. And this is really to deal with the foreclosure problem that we see. In many cases, and this actually started at the federal level, with the National Ocean Policy, when it was first developed, there were roundtables held with multiple industries. And the submarine cable industry was told by the White House, we've had enough of these, we don't need to have one focused on the telecommunications industry. That still provokes rage in this industry, given that it is one of the two oldest marine industries, the other being commercial fishing and then submarine telegraphs. And just a lack of understanding about the importance, economic and national security-wise, to the United States. So really starting at the top level, there needs to be a greater recognition and inclusion of this industry in discussions about who's operating in the marine environment, who needs to be protected, how can we try to coordinate. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And again, this is building on the first report that we issued on spatial separation. The third recommendation is a more subtle one, and it's a more legally oriented one, but it is for the Commission to evaluate the role of the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, and the Coastal Zone Management Act as coordination mechanisms. We see other agencies rely on these as a basis for accounting for and potentially protecting submarine cable infrastructure. And our view is, in general, that they're completely inadequate. NEPA is an environmental protection statute. The Coastal Zone Management Act is an odd hybrid law that allows the federal government to review and approve state-level protection programs for coastal zones and coordinate certain federal and state activities. Neither of those is really a marine planning tool or specifically mentions submarine cables or the need to protect them. So there's a legal gap here. We don't have a super agency that is responsible for marine spatial planning in the United States. We don't have a law that sets up a process like that. But there certainly is the need for and the opportunity for agencies to coordinate with each other and share information so that they're not making poor regulatory or policy decisions. And that's what we're calling for here. The fourth recommendation is that the Commission continue to promote further industry-to-industry cooperation. Throughout this process, we have not been seeking purely governmental solutions. The submarine cable industry, throughout its entire existence, dating back to the 1850s, has worked to reach out to other marine industries to try to coordinate with them directly and reach commercially reasonable arrangements that reflect industry practices and mutual interests. And we don't want to see governmental action, although there's a big need for it, as highlighted in our other recommendations, crowd out this process. I think this has been most successful in particular regions of the world, including the United States, with the commercial fishing industry, where we see the submarine cable industry and commercial fishing groups create cable fishing committees, as they're known, to set up a mechanism, and we addressed this in our first report, where if a commercial fisherman happens to snag gear on a submarine cable, that they agree to abandon it and will be compensated by a fund established by the submarine cable industry, rather than get into a tug of war and trying to retrieve their gear and damage the cable. And so I think that has been very successful. not so much with the Japanese fishermen's unions, but that's not within the FCC's scope here. We also see a long history of coordination with the oil and gas industries. That could still be improved, but it stands in great contrast to emerging industries like renewable energy, where many of the project proponents are simply, they don't have a history in the marine environment, particularly with submarine cables, and so it often comes as a surprise to them late in their project licensing process when they realize where they propose to go with their projects. And that's generated, I think, a lot of the strife that the Commission has tried to be helpful with and has sought to reach out directly to other agencies to try to prevent this from occurring in the future. So, again, this is a desire to continue to create mechanisms, and I think, for example, with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, it has adopted revised construction and operation guidelines for offshore wind farms, and it specifies in those guidelines what resources are available from the North American Submarine Cable Association, including mapping resources, and the need to demonstrate that there has been direct coordination with submarine cable operators as a condition there. So BOEM is asking for a certification or verification by the entity that it regulates that it has reached out directly to the other industry. And again, we think that that's an effective mechanism, something that we would like to see more of with respect to other federal agencies and other marine industries. And I was wrong. We had only 4 recommendations, not 5. We consolidated them. So.
Okay, so I think we'd like to see if there's any questions for Kent and Catherine on Working Group 4A, Geodiversity, and their 4 recommendations. Any questions in the room?
Really for Catherine, did you discuss at all how federal government might facilitate consideration of federal coastline that's under federal, parts of bases and installations that might be compatible in the future with submarine cable landings? Is there any recommendation for us as to how we can facilitate that engagement across the federal interagency?
We did not discuss that in the working group. I think that's, it's definitely something to be pursued, but while we didn't discuss it, you can see how a base would fall into these considerations of cost and ease of permitting. I think, under the current regimes, circumstances, the decision would be made completely by the military commander there, and I think it would be probably a difficult road to go down for anyone who wanted to land a cable there. So I think while it's definitely a worthwhile opportunity to pursue, it's not necessarily as much within the purview of the commercial entities that made up the majority of the group.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on the phone? Okay, with no further questions, I'd like to have the council's vote on Working Group 4A's final report on geographic diversities. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Congratulations, you've been approved with your report. Thanks so much. Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute health break. It is, let's see what time it is. It's 3:35, and we'll start back up at 3:40 with Working Group 6. And we have Brian Scarpelli, who will be on the phone giving that presentation. Thanks so much. He's here? Oh, he's here. Sorry. We'll have a slight change in the order of the agenda that you may have before you. We will have Working Group 6, Security by Design, presentation by Brian Scarpelli. After that, we will go through Working Group 5. networks, it's cybersecurity information. Working Group 10, legacy systems and service risk reduction. Working Group 4B, network timing. Working Group 7, cybersecurity workforce. Working Group 8, priority services, and then Working Group 9, Wi-Fi security with time allowing. So at this time, I'd like to invite Brian Scarpelli to the podium to provide the final recommendations on security by design and the attestation framework. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Those slides up. Great. All right. Well, I will keep it condensed for everyone because I know we've got a lot on the agenda here still. But really pleased to be here and hope everyone's doing well. My name is Brian Scarpelli with ACT, the App Association, and myself and Joel Molinoff of CBS are the co-chairs of the Working Group 6, Secure Hardware and Software Security by Design. Joel is in transit right now, so he's not able to be here, but he's here in spirit with us, and we're both really pleased with where we're at today and kind of getting to this final stage. So this slide is just to give everyone a bit of the context, tracing back to a Technological Advisory Council recommendation from a few years ago, I believe at this point. We were tasked as a working group to develop recommendations and best practices to enhance security of hardware and software in the core public communications network. There's a diagram I have coming up that attempts to put some definition around what I mean by the core public communications network. And then, so that was one. And then two was to develop some voluntary mechanisms by which we could demonstrate the success of the recommendations we come up with in the first deliverable. So in March of 2016, earlier this year, the working group finalized and submitted to you all the first of those two deliverables and it was adopted by the council. So we were very, very happy to reach that milestone, and that's why there's a little check there in the slide. And so then after that, we turned to, with the goal of being here today and presenting what I'm presenting to you, development of the voluntary attestation framework. Hopefully, okay. I know you can't read this slide. Sorry about that, but this is in the report as well. It's a layout of the diversity of stakeholders that we found. Who engaged, who were interested and engaged on the security by design topic, and if you take a look at the slides later, you can probably see who that is, but wanted to just make sure to include that. And this is the diagram I mentioned a moment ago. I'm not trying to rehash this. There was more. I know Joel and I wanted to have more dialogue about this when we presented our first report, and that was really where we had the discussion in the group about what do we mean by the core network. But we ended up going with the definition already settled on by DHS in the National Security Risk Assessment from 2012, and that's what this diagram is. Okay, so we're now. Sorry. So I think we're. You know what? These are, I believe, the recommendations. I'm sorry. This is the background. I couldn't see that. Sorry. Okay, so we were recognizing the advantages of building security into hardware and software rather than doing it after the fact. That was the motivation, I think, behind this entire thing. Back to the TAC recommendation, the commission has brought us together in Working Group 6 to examine this topic, and our first deliverable, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but contained recommendations of voluntary best practices. And to make a long story short, or to summarize that, we took the NIST cybersecurity framework and found specific controls that we could recommend, that we would emphasize for use to incorporate security by design principles. And I'm afraid I apologize for the repetition in my slides, but this is again a description of what the second deliverable is intended to be, to examine and review the best ways to provide assurances around those recommendations we made in the first report, and to provide voluntary mechanisms that could assure to the Commission and the public that these practices are effective, being applied, et cetera. So this is just a little to the methodology of how we came up with what we came up with. I think really this really boils down to is I thought we had great participation from a diversity of viewpoints and stakeholders in this effort, and some pretty intense participation. I'm happy to say it was not one of those things where this was only driven by a handful of people. It was good to see that it was pretty vibrant. And so as part of this, we wanted to get a survey, a lay of the land around how these assurances are made, and we had several. So anyway, we'll get to this in a moment. There's a lot of different approaches out there that are used around different standardized approaches, and we had some of our expert volunteers in the working group, kind of summarize that for us and answer questions as kind of as a resource to the rest of the group to help everyone get an idea of the landscape. And then we based on that, we were able to sit down and find some consensus recommendations and findings. So just on the findings front, it was very clear that there is not a single predefined attestation methodology that would meet the needs of all the companies that reside in this core public communications network space, and so we looked into what those different attestation approaches are, and found that they use self-assessment, some use third-party certification, and there are even some in other sectors that are required by the law.
Did you find, and maybe you found both, that where attestation and self-assessment was used in vendor-to-vendor relationships, was it standard within a particular sector, or is it more so that it's standard within a given company, and there's significant variation company to company?
That's a great question. We talked about that a lot, and I think I would say both. Actually, I think I would say both. I know that for some larger service providers, they have unique requirements and may have their own approach, and they incorporate different aspects of some of the ones that we evaluate in the report. I know I didn't include a diagram inside the slides of that, but we have a table in the report that lists some of these approaches. But yes, there in addition to some company-specific approaches, there are definitely some that are sector-specific as well. But even just within the communication sector, in quotes, there was a good number and some diversity between the approaches used there as well.
And where you found that variation, that diversity, did the companies feel that it was a competitive discriminator between companies in the same sector, or is it something that were there less variation, it would be useful for all companies within a sector?
I think to that I would say that the role of competition probably is the driving factor. Yeah, I think robust security practices and in a supply chain are seen as a differentiator between the companies. Yeah,
I'm just not sure that very many consumers of broadband or other communications are out there with their little cheat sheet of
Sure.
What supply chain risk attestation standards did one company use versus another? And it just would seem that while certainly constraining how a company might approach that task, would perhaps go against the agility we would want to see within companies, providing better, more recognized standards, or a Rosetta Stone, if you will, towards useful supply chain risk standards in this regard would be useful for the entire industry and increase confidence in those vendor-to-vendor relationships.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there is a proprietary nature to this, in what a service provider X might require of their vendors. But for those who would choose to, there are, as we learned, there's attestations that you could get assessed by some third parties. That we talked to some of these third parties, and you can publicly, if you choose to, share that you have passed that, that you are certified to that. So that can be a differentiator.
ISO, UL. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. Oh, okay. I just want to make sure I didn't skip ahead one. Oh, I think I just had. I'm sorry, I might have hit the button. I didn't want to lose my place. Okay, I didn't. Oops. So, this is where we tied in. Yes, okay, to pick it up. This is where we tied in back to the work of the previous cycle of the CSRIC, and the really great work that Working Group 4 of the CSRIC 4 did in providing recommendations around cybersecurity risk management generally for the communications sector, but specifically around attestations. And as some of you may know, they essentially recommend, I hope I'm summarizing this right because I know that the people who led this effort are probably sitting around the table, but they, as one component of the attestations was to create a construct where there were protected, PCII I guess is the term, but confidential, protected meetings that individual organizations could hold with the Commission to discuss these matters. And this component, security by design, fit well into that construct. So that's basically what this is saying here, and that's a major recommendation of the report as well. Okay. So just some further recommendations that we, I believe they're listed as findings. Sorry about that. But some further recommendations that we listed that we agreed to really were to avoid the regulatory route to address conformity to any particular supply chain or security by design related assessment mechanism. Because, and this really is because of the vibrant ecosystem that we found out there to address this area, and again that the in-person meetings that we believe as a component of these cyber risk management meetings would continue to foster greater and greater collaboration in the public-private partnership approach that the CSRIC really embodies and other efforts of the Commission. So just in closing, this is a big timeline that we made that's probably not too, look closely at it. You can maybe see most of the letters, but it's, we made this back when the group was started. So it just is meant to reflect all the deadlines, and here we are at the far right of the timeline where there's a little red flag. We animated in some check marks there. Oh, okay. I think that was the end. Thank you very much.
Great.
Again, because this is the last presentation we'll give it. Again, Joel. I know Joel. I can tell you I speak for Joel as well when I say that we really do appreciate the support of our liaisons and the commission at large and all of the volunteer members who were so generous with their time and resources in helping us address this important issue and come up with these recommendations.
Great.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So at this point, we'd like to be able to take a vote on the recommendations from Working Group 6, Security by Design Attestation Framework. Are there any questions at this point from anyone in the room? Any questions on the phone? Okay. So all in favor of approving Working Group 6 recommendations, please say yay.
Yay.
All opposed? Congratulations. Your recommendations have been approved. So we'll move on to Working Group 5, Cybersecurity Framework. I just want to say as they get set up, this is, I think, a noteworthy moment. We've had 47 recommendations approved today. So I was just counting them up as they went through. It's a significant amount of effort, and having been the steering committee chair, I just want to thank the working group chairs of those particular working groups that are closing today. They spent a lot of time personally and professionally working through some significant issues that don't materialize here at the council. And all of their team members put in a significant amount of time. And I don't know if it's appropriate, but I just thought maybe for this working group, the closing of all 5 would give them a round of applause. All right, great. Thanks so much. So I'd like to invite Rod up to the podium and go through Working Group 5.
Just information sharing.
I'm sorry, cybersecurity information sharing.
Yes. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I will hopefully be fairly brief, and so we can get everything in and out of here on time. Apologies for Chris Boyer, who's been one of my co-chairs, who's been doing the lion's share of the work, and Brian Allen. So I'm here to present for our group and our continuing story of working through his. This is like a soap opera or a serial. We're moving through one chapter at a time and coming out with different portions of the final report, which we'll give at the final CSRIC meeting for this particular CSRIC. So, just in review, we are looking at cybersecurity information sharing as it occurs within the telecom sector in particular. Obviously, it's occurring in a much wider wider area, and the concentration here is how it applies to the telecom industry, particularly within the United States. But that ends up overlapping with a lot of different things. So we want to take a look at that and how we can identify what is actually going on and give recommendations about how to make that better within the auspices of the CSRIC. That very long list there, as you can see, there's a lot of people collaborating on this effort, just like there are sharing information out there. So it's an extremely a diverse set of people within the industry, and whether it's the telecoms themselves or vendors or people who are cybersecurity experts who are giving their opinions on what's going on. So to recap, where we have gone through pretty much every one of these quarterly meetings, we've teased out a little bit more on the overall picture, taking a look at how people use information, why they use it, different things that might be impeding them. Was last episode. This time we're taking a look at trust pools or sharing groups or trust communities. There are lots of euphemisms for them, but basically taking a look at who is out there, what makes that up, and why those groups form in the first place. So here's a rather long paragraph. I don't think I'll read the whole paragraph here unless there's a desire for me to do so. On what trust pools are, but in essence, they there is no particular hard and fast rule around these things. We brought this definition together to kind of describe them in a way that's consistent. But we are looking at things that we can do together to protect networks, detect things that are happening, and respond and recover quickly to them. And various trust groups and pools will have different focuses depending on their makeup. And the NIST cybersecurity framework is a good way of categorizing a lot of these things, because it gives you points of reference to compare what your activities are with a codified look at how you handle cybersecurity. And the other thing that we're taking a look here is at how these things have developed over time and kind of the evolution of where they may be going to as well. Yep.
Rod, I'm glad to see that at least by the last sentence you got to the analyze piece, and I almost feel like recommending a change to the group's name from information sharing to shared analysis, because the trust pools, I think, as you work on this, if the sharing of information alone had such significant value to networks, we'd be there by now. The real value is when you get in and you do that deeper analysis on the information collected and correlate that to operation of networks, which doesn't scale well nationally. You can't do that with 30,000 entities and really expect it to be effective, because of that personal relationship that will need to be there ultimately where networks are operating. So I would encourage you, as the team completes the task, to really look at trust pools in how they facilitate meaningful shared analysis, as well as am I willing to share some machine-to-machine information via trust pool, but am I really able to then have my network security team and my network operators gain benefit from that collected data?
Right, and I would say that there's many things you bring up there that are kind of in the discussion that the working group has been having, and that kind of the table stakes is getting information moved around at all, and we are, there's a lot of, depending on the kind of effort, there's a lot of that going on. Some of it will be more information centric, some of it will be more analysis centric, and you end up with a kind of a virtuous circle where you, as you add more information and viewpoints and capabilities to that pool, you're able to take what might just come in initially as a set of indicators of compromise and turn that into, now we've got more indicators of compromise that are related to those by infrastructure, and then you'll have somebody who may have done some malware analysis that then can do some attribution or potential motives for that, and then you can, depending on the circumstance, can then turn that into, well, here's where they're going to be going, or here's this may be something we might tie to law enforcement, et cetera. So it ends up being this iterative process, and it really depends on the kinds of information that were there, and then the involvement of people who can take that information and do something with it. And it's not taking all the information necessarily holistically and going, wow, I'm going to figure this all out. It's taking a portion of it, just like any mystery. You take a look at the clues and you move on to the next thing, and you definitely see that happen. That's much more in the kind of the human participation kind of trust pool, and there's a lot of those. When you get to machine type things, then we're still in the area where we've got emerging technology, where you're doing a lot of machine learning kinds of things. You're doing automated correlation and things like that, where we're still, while that is occurring, we're still in an area where we're seeing industry is still working on solving these problems. So, and I think that the timing on this is good, and that we are seeing a lot of different things being built to try and automate more and more of the stuff. It's but those tools are only as good as the places you use them. And by showing value of contributing different information from different places and perspectives, you can greatly increase the value of those tools that you build. So, for example, if you implement a tool on one company's network infrastructure, you will gain a lot of information, but you don't have those other insights that others might have developed, or that complete picture. And by bringing those things together and then iterating on those, either through the manual process I mentioned, or through some sort of automated process where you're getting some of that more of that information out, that's where we're basically going as an industry, I think. So there's a lot of it. We're in the midst of this. As many of the other things we've talked about, today and over past CSRICs, we're in the middle of the development of many of these capabilities and technologies. So it's a good time to be saying, okay, if we're going to use that, where are these places that would be most effective for implementing those kinds of things? So, get back to the presentation here, because I think I only have a couple more slides here. So we have some points here around who are the and this is lifted from the highlights from the latest version of the report we put out, which is several pages. This goes into, but the idea here is to break down what are the characteristics of individuals and organizations that actually are included within these trust pools. And typically there's some sort of shared purpose, either from an industry's perspective or a problem set perspective, where you're trying to solve a particular set of issues. It might also be that you're within a shared community that has kind of grown up over time of operators, for example, where you have worked together on issues, and then trust pools kind of naturally form, and you can on those. In those areas, you can think of that as just natural human interaction, where you work with somebody on a problem, you tend to trust them more, and the other people that you work with, that happens. We see that constantly in the cyber world, and I think largely because it is very difficult to solve those problems by yourself, because you don't have visibility and you don't have all the information you need to do that. So I think that we've had over the 20, 30, 40 years that we've been doing this, might even be that long, that you have these communities that have formed and have created very strong relationships to do these things. And those end up spitting out new groups as new problems come up, as people change, as people come in and out of the industry, as different participants in the industry will come along. But there's usually some sort of a rallying point that group is trying to deal with, whether it's a particular malware sample or it's a widespread problem like spoofing, right? Things like that. There's trust groups looking at that. So this slide here has a subset of the subset that we have gathered, showing some of the examples of different levels of trust pools that are out there, and we have those that are focused, and we've divided up into a couple of areas. Those that are focused on particular problem areas, and those are operational areas, and those that are kind of more sector-driven. And you have everything from formal chartered groups that kind of fall into the ISOW-ish type of thing. The concept of ISOW has been around to, I think, has evolved to describe what has been happening and formalize it. And then all the way down to very informal security trust pools, which are kind of the traditional old school ones, if you will, that have been around for a while and have evolved over time to create sets of rules, sets of standards of behavior, et cetera, for members to be vetted in, to be given information and trusted to continue to work with that information, how they work with information. Traffic light protocol, TLP, is used extensively through a lot of these different organizations, and there's some really interesting things going on with TLP right now, because there's been some definitional work done by FIRST, and others didn't like the definitions. So there's always this kind of how can we do better at sharing this and dealing with the information that we share. And then there's groups that have come together, either driven by industry or a need for a particular area that have formed either industry associations or a formally supported kind of chartered thing like an ISAC that then deal with these kind of cross-jurisdictional problems where you may have people in multiple sectors or within a sector in multiple organizations that have to deal with issues. So, and then you have things like the NCFTA, which are set up to bridge the gap between the industry and law enforcement, which is often a tough gap or a tough bridge to build. So we're seeing more of those. I know the British have just stood up a similar thing to NCFTA themselves, looking at that model. So there's lots and lots of these things that are popping up, evolving, and moving forward. And that, I believe, is the last slide. Yes. So I'll take any other questions that people are wanting to throw out there.
Any questions for Rod on cybersecurity information sharing? Yes, Richard?
I have a question. I just wanted to kind of add to it that I've been in the industry not as quite as long as Rod, but
hold it.
but long enough. And the trust pool, I think, is a very important thing for us to kind of see and look at. And I think while we had the laundry list of all the pools, I want to make sure it's not underestimated the informal ones, because it's the informal groups that are probably doing the majority of the work that's not seen. The stuff that's making the internet work, the stuff that's securing the internet, the stuff that's securing and protecting everyone on the internet is 90% these informal pools. And so to be careful when we move forward, when we talk about the platforms and everything else, that we don't build something that's so structured and so rigid that we now preclude these informal pools. Or basically, the informal pools will continue to ignore all the formal things that are occurring. And so it's just a path we have to be very careful of, because we're involved in quite a few of these pools. So the new UK one's the CDA, the Cyber Defense Alliance, right? So we're working with them already on different things they're doing. So Maria went from the NCFTA to CDA, just running that one as an example. But it's just, but again, it was the personal relationships from the informal pools that are causing these things. And so I just want to kind of reiterate that point. But these pools, all the pools are important, official and non-official.
I couldn't agree with you more, Richard. And we've actually got a little bit of interesting history in the report update we did about how these groups first started forming, and have literally been forming, reforming, and et cetera over the last several decades. And they do drive a lot of the activities and the creation of some of the more formal groups. I think a lot of the folks who created MOG were on these informal groups, for example, and there's other influences as well, but that helped drive creations of more formal organizations. So you see the formal things evolving out of the informal ones.
But just as an example, the Configure Working Group, right, that basically captured the largest botnet we've ever seen, was completely informal, yet had 150 organizations participating in it as an informal group.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the informal groups because they do tend to, you don't participate if you're not getting value out of it. And so they can be very focused on solving real problems relevant to the companies that see it in their best interest to come together and work on those issues. I think my concern isn't so much in the areas where that activity is going on and is fruitful. It's the number of providers that just perpetually aren't engaged in those kind of relationships. And I'm hopeful that in the final report that you all will offer some recommendations on how do we expand the circle of providers that are participating in meaningful relationships, whether they're formal or informal. And a lot of the smaller providers they're subsidized. They're getting just enough money to provide service, and any nickel spent above that, what they get in subsidies to provide service, to put towards cybersecurity, comes out of somebody's paycheck. And so how do we ensure that the outliers have
increasingly can be participating in this healthy part of the ecosystem.
My worry with that is because there are sometimes the formal trust groups that just because you belong to an ISAC, you think you've checked the box.
But let me restate it. I think the informals are more valuable.
Oh, no, I'm not disagreeing.
I think they're more valuable. How do I get more providers into those more valuable relationships?
Right, but and it's just making sure clear that people don't think just because you're part of a formal process or formal organization.
80% of your list doesn't do any machine-to-machine sharing. It doesn't have any meaningful analysis, tactical analysis on a day-to-day basis. So I like the fact you captured a lot of associations that are doing good work in talking about the importance of cyber and the developing a best practice and a number of things. But I don't think that's where we're aiming for this working group. We're aiming towards the how do we get into the no-kid and I'm sharing relevant tactical information, machine observations of what's going on in the network with other similar entities such that anomalies can be rapidly identified, followed up on through analysis, and remediation and or preventive action can be rapidly taken. And that's the aim point, not understanding, yet one more industry association that now has a subgroup that meets quarterly to talk about the latest DHS bulletins. Right.
I think without spending a lot of time here, we are definitely working towards that goal. I think there's when you start thinking about the smaller providers who may or may not have any expertise at all within their confines to deal with these issues, that's when you need to take a look at how are you involving the entire ecosystem from government to vendors to everybody else, so that the information that is being shared within these more formal or even informal areas trickles into, or hopefully gushes into, right, the protection mechanisms that these networks have, right?
Yeah. So if they're USF funded, should they be able to use USF funding to be a part of one of these effective groups?
Or maybe some of these informal groups should be funded.
Now we're talking about useful recommendations. Go do.
We will take that feedback. I have to see another question over here.
Oh, not a question, but just to reiterate the point that Richard's making, and with you, Admiral, the comment on the small operators. But I mean, that's something that we see all the time, the importance of the trust aspect of this, and particularly now that there's all this discussion on ISAL standards and what is an ISAL and how the standard gets developed and what the nitty-gritty is of that complicates it even more to try to figure out how to use that mechanism as well. But it all boils down to the trust end of it.
And that's the hardest thing to be transitive, right? You have to build trust by actually participating and adding something of value. And when you're catch-22 when you're in a smaller organization, it's really hard to do that. So if there's ways that you can automate sharing of information between these entities, well, you can build some trust that way just by the fact that you're sharing information back and forth. So those are I think, some of the areas we want to tailor our recommendations towards, is how do we get to that next level and how do we help inform the ISAL standards process and things like that.
Great. Any questions on the phone for Rod? Okay, great. Thanks, Rod.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. At this time, we're going to jump to Working Group 10. Now, if you remember, Working Group 10 is our newest one. It's on legacy systems and security risk reduction. It's co-led by Danny McPherson and John Kimmons, and John will be here talking for us today.
Thank you. So this is a new working group that we talked about at the last CSRIC. We've gotten it off the ground over the last 2 months. So I'm going to kind of quickly run through what's our objectives, deliverables, schedule, our membership, current membership, and then how we've been operating and our roadmap. So there's been a lot of conversation in the media and elsewhere describing different types of attacks on the telecom infrastructure, the legacy TDM, SS7 type of world. in terms of all different types of attack vectors, location, unauthorized location tracking, eavesdropping, etc. And there's also been concerns about disclosure of sensitive information from the network. So this kind of was part of the background, and the sense of urgency was to do a risk analysis, look at what's being done today to counter these risks, attack vectors, etc., and then make any recommendations in the typical CSRIC format. So you can read the details, but we're looking at things starting with the legacy of SS7 and the evolution of the signaling network to things like diameter and others. Okay. Also looking at how the business and operations models have changed. As you know, historically, SS7 was built as a closed network. Everybody was trusted, so we've been talking about trust the last 10 minutes. Okay, so now we have to relook at the trust model. Okay, and what does that mean in terms of what kinds of controls and security measures that have to be in place? So we do have a schedule in terms of we're in the throes of doing a risk assessment, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail in one of the upcoming slides. But basically, we're going to produce a risk assessment by the end of the calendar year, and then the follow-on to by the end of CSRIC 5, which is March, to make recommendations in terms of what we should be doing, continuing to do, what short-term, long-term types of recommendations that we should be making to counter any of these attack vectors or changes in terms of how the telecom infrastructure operates and it's evolving. So we've solicited membership, and we've had we now have a great group of a mix of people from carriers, standards bodies, industry associations, government. DHS has a number of people. So we have quite a cross-section of people. Stephen McKinnon is the FCC liaison. So all these people are now actively engaged in terms of this working group. And we have real subject matter experts. Travis Russell from Oracle's written books about SS7. Okay, so we really do have a lot of expertise and experience in the working group. So, in terms of deliverables, as I said, we've created a risk assessment outline, which I'll share with you. I'm not going to walk through it in detail, but at least share what we're about in terms of how we're structuring our risk assessment, because we want to make sure that we profile the exact what's going on, what are the current risks, where are we in terms of controls and countermeasures and what's being done, and then what is kind of a launching pad for recommendations that we'll make in the next phase of the work. So, our goal is to have a first draft sometime in the October timeframe, and then the final risk assessment document in the December timeframe. Now, one thing that has come up in the group that we're kind of working our way through is how do we deal with sensitive information? Okay, when you start talking about how can somebody attack a network, okay, and what you're currently doing to counter that can get into pretty sensitive territory. So we recognize that we're working to identify anything that are really going to be sensitive, okay, that won't be we'll extract and the essence of it and put it into the public documents. But in terms of some of the sensitive information that will be shared among the working group members, we are going to control the distribution of that kind of information. But it's important that we really get down to what are the real risks, what people are actually seeing, what people are actually doing in terms of the countering those attack vectors. Because there's tons of stuff you can read all day, watch YouTube videos, 60 Minutes, whatever, okay, about all the claims, and everybody can do everything, okay. But we really have to kind of get a reality check in terms of this work. So we do recognize that there is sensitive information that we're going to have to deal with in this process. So one of the things we also recognize that we need an outreach. Okay, so some of the names may be familiar, maybe not. Okay, but Silke Holtzman from Nokia Bell Labs has been very active in all the various standards body industry forums that are very relevant to this area. Okay, and we've had her brief and share information. Karsten Knoll has been talking about SS7 vulnerabilities, telecom vulnerabilities for many years. Okay, so, and then James Moran, we have recognized that especially GSMA, which a number of our members belong to, has been doing great work in this area in terms of SS7 and interconnection monitoring and things like that. Okay, so we have this outreach program, to look at the current environment standards, et cetera, okay, and we may add other subject matter experts that will brief us and provide information in terms of, as I said, the threat landscape and security landscape and what they see in terms of some of the roadblocks potentially, in terms of some of the implementation of some of the countermeasures. So the next slide is just kind of the basics of the outline for the risk assessment. It's going to obviously talk about SS7 and the signaling network and the history of it and its application, how it's being used in mobile networks, wireline networks, etc. But then we'll start getting into the meat of, what are the reported threats and risks in terms of unauthorized access, and interception of traffic, message integrity issues, whatever. Okay, and what are the targets? Then it's going to be getting into what's the impact. I mean, you can talk about threats and vulnerabilities all day long. Okay, but really, what is the impact to the infrastructure? What types of impacts to the user, to services, to data, to the integrity of the network? Is it, we're obviously focused on the U.S. telecom infrastructure, but also the dynamics between U.S. and international is also part of this, because some of the attacks can be coming from offshore. It's also what are the vulnerabilities potentially in various products or protocols that we're using today, or their implementation. What are the current, as I said, security capabilities, what protections, what practices are being used, what tools. There are commercial vendors out there that are offering SS7 firewall capabilities and things like that. So that's really kind of the essence of the risk assessment. So we're going to be continuing to document the risk assessment. We are in the mode of weekly conference calls with the group, and as I said, factoring in various SME presentations. We are leveraging standards bodies also and industry forums to leverage what work's going on. As I mentioned, the GSMA has interconnection monitoring capability definitions, SS7 firewall rules, for example, and things like that a lot of our participants in the industry has already provided input into. So we are trying to leverage what's been done, what's also starting to look at maybe some other ideas where, like we talked about trust, the SS7 network was built on a trust model that everybody was trusted. Now maybe there is going to be concepts of trust zones. Okay, maybe for certain associations you're going to have a certain level of trust, and others you may, because of unknown integrity, you may have different types of associations, and security monitoring may kick in. That's more intense than a normal signaling message coming across or whatever. So we're going to be looking at quite an array of quick fixes, things that can be done, things that are, we need to study more. There may be some more recommendations in terms of some areas that need more work to really figure out as to whether they're practical. We are also trying to monitor what's going on in other groups like 3GPP. We also have members that are part of the robocalling strike force. So we're also monitoring what's going on there. So we are trying to monitor what is happening both in the traditional telephony world as well as the IP world. That's it. Any questions?
Any questions for John?
I'm very encouraged that you're looking that you've described the trust model as having evolved significantly from when SS7 was first embarked upon, and there are so many other corporate players now that have signaling layer access and attributes with today's SS7 that it does strike me that it would be fruitful to examine whether there are trust pools or risk segmentation within the signaling plane. It just seems to me intuitive that their risk segmentation would be a useful endeavor that could be embarked upon in a way that wouldn't be overly restricting or overly costly, but would limit the ability for the whole system to be brought down.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can say you can't monitor everything, so how do you segment it and put some prioritization, in play? So, there may be that intersection between risk and trust pools with, what you're doing, okay, as opposed to, oh, yeah, I got to monitor everything, I got to filter everything, which is, virtually, it's hard to scale, and things are going to get through and, all those kind of things. So, yes, I think we have to study that now, whether our thinking in the industry and the standards is all there. I'm not sure of that. So there may be some recommendations along the lines that, further work has to be done in that area.
Yeah, and I'm also encouraged and would further encourage you to leverage the work of the robocalling task force, 3GPP, but also GSMA and what they're doing now with eSIMs. And there's an evolving landscape here that should serve to inform risk reduction activity in legacy SS7. So it could be all-consuming, though, and if we're not careful, just get into a survey project.
We're not going to fix 50 years of telephony,
But bring us to concrete recommendations on this piece here. Right. There's significant congressional interest in together us reducing risk. As American consumers increasingly are concerned about, should we worry today that I might lose telephony?
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions on the phone for John? Okay. Thank you, John. Next up, we'll have Jennifer Manning on Working Group 4B Network Timing.
Thank you. So I'm probably going to be the shortest presentation because I did such a long presentation last time. Just to remind folks, we're working on network timing solutions to GPS. We've completed, and we presented last CSRIC meeting, are identifying potential options for network timing single source reductions. We have about 13 different options. And we're right now spending a fair amount of time analyzing each of the options on a number of factors, including benefits, accuracy, costs, availability. A lot of the options we're looking at are still not available, vulnerability, reliability, and coverage. And we have our report is due in December. So right now, besides the analysis, we're, of course, doing a lot of writing. And so that's about where we are. It's short and sweet. So thank you.
Any questions for Jennifer? Okay, great. Thanks. So next up, we'll have Working Group 7, co-chaired by Drew Morin and Bill Bonney, and that'll be on the cybersecurity workforce.
Good afternoon. They're bringing up the slides. Unfortunately, the drone carrying the cocktails did get stopped at security, so it couldn't get in. I think we need to have a CSRIC working group on how to get drones able to deliver to council meetings. Anyway, enough of that poor humor. Let's go ahead and get going. Cybersecurity workforce, we all are dealing with the same challenge, which is we don't have enough cybersecurity professionals to deal with the cybersecurity workload. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the background slides. This is just a quick status update on where we are in the process. So we already understand what the work group is looking at. Our deliverables were 2. The deliverables were basically to evaluate the national cybersecurity workforce and look at a standard taxonomy and whether it was applicable to the communications segment, which we have accomplished that, and we are continuing to actually look at now roles as well as a way for an ongoing support of it so it can evolve. And so we'll have some more information on that as we go into the final report. The other part of what we're looking at is evaluating what some best practices would be and how we can communicate that to the council so that they can we would make recommendations for you all to vote on what you think the best practices are. The membership is fairly small, but very effective membership. It does represent a lot of different segments within the communications market, so we're pretty pleased with that. We've actually leveraged the diversity of our members to try and make sure we have a fairly broad base when we look at these best practice recommendations. Schedule, I already mentioned that we've done an interim product that was delivered in March. We will have a draft of our final report in December, and in 2017 we'll have our final report. I suspect that in the draft report there will probably be some minor gaps. One of those will be probably on the update of the process, because we're planning on looking at that second. We wanted to make sure we get the data in and analyzed and get our recommendation for best practices done first, because that's going to be the lion's share of the work. So that's what we're really focusing on right now. But we haven't forgotten the rules. I'll just say we are actually evaluating and working with CWA on some of the rules that they're processing. And CWA, by the way, is a working group that actually is founded primarily out of the financial community, and we're actually supporting it. It's not the Communications Workers of America. It's a different CWA, Cybersecurity Workforce Alliance. Okay? I have to say that every time, so we have way too many acronyms. Okay, so what we've done is we've focused the working group into 6 segments. 3 we consider to be internal, and they are industry, public safety, and academia, because that's who we're directly dealing with as an industry. And then external are influencers, which also have practices within their own segment that we figure are going to be great sources of information for us to find best practices, and that is the federal government, state and local, and the financial sector. So, moving along, in the third quarter, we do still have biweekly phone calls with the working group. We've mixed it with not only review of documentation, status updates, but we also have included presentations from specific subject matter experts. Because we're writing best practices, we thought it would be a smart idea to have ADIS present to us the proper way to document a best practice. So we had that as one of our presentations. We've also had presentations from companies that provide federal cybersecurity training. We got a presentation from OPM. That was actually the Scholarship for Service NSF program is actually managed out of OPM. So we had her present to us about that. Lynn Clark came and talked to us about the Centers for Academic Excellence, which is a program that goes across a lot of different academic institutions. And so some of this is to help understand what the other activities are that are going, and to make the members of the working group see what is happening outside of their own sector. And so it helps them to be a little bit more advised as to the broader scope of activities ongoing. This is in complement to the ones we've had in the second quarter and already previously. So we'll continue to proceed down that track, although the primary focus in this quarter going forward will be on driving towards the document draft and the final document. So my favorite, where's Waldo? Waldo is telling us that we are currently, I'm sorry, I had to do something. It was too quiet here. Anyway, we're complete the data analysis by segment. So we are currently, where we've done is each one of the segment areas have gathered up data. We're actually pulling it together. We're starting to compile it into the outline of the document I've produced. We will have that document for internal review, and then from that we're going to derive the best practice recommendations by segment, and we'll probably roll it up to the entire group. So that being the case, we are on schedule, and that's the report. Any questions? Yes, sir. Let me guess. Are we using the military workforce retirees? And no.
How does best practices solve the shortage of workers?
Okay, well, let me throw this out to you. When you go to an HR department and you've got a combination of cybersecurity, hiring managers, technologists, and HR people, and you look at what's worked for you, And we can come back and we can say, hey, you know what's worked? Things like Scholarship for Service is a program that's worked for the federal government. So we say best practice, and when we can correlate that into a wording that says X should implement Y subject to Z, okay? And the X, the Y, and the Z are what we're trying to figure out the proper wording is there. How can we adapt what has been successful in other venues and say, does this make sense as an adapted or as something we should adopt as a communication segment, as a best practice for improving workforce recruiting? So in other words, if it's worked in the past and it continues to work, maybe we can adopt it or adapt it to our needs. And that's what we're going to take those programs and communicate that back as a best practice.
I just worry that we're using best practices as a crutch, as a filter, as opposed to as an enhancement. So I just didn't hear much about what the goal of the best practices were, rather than we're just spending all the time looking at best practices, and it's like, which best practices, and what was the goal of best practices, and how does that drive to the solution of how do we increase the cyber workforce, or whatever term we have for that.
Right.
I can't remember your acronym, sorry.
I try to avoid acronyms anyway, but yeah, the cybersecurity workforce.
And that's where my question really is around.
Terminology been. So it's a fair question. When we take a look at what we're trying to do is we're casting a broad net to learn what people have done that have worked. And so best practices is a term of art that has basically been provided to us as a way that we can provide to the council. Here's some recommendations on what you can advise. The council can advise the FCC on what they might want to push forward and say, here's things that the communication segment should focus on to try and improve their execution in cybersecurity workforce. Or here's some partnerships that we may want to do. And the other ones they've been recommendations. It's the same thing, I guess, term of art being best practice from the standpoint of the way that the CSRIC terminology works in our charter. But what we're talking about is a recommendation.
Okay, and that's fine. I just want to make sure I understood how you were utilizing it, because when you use best practices, particularly in a venue like this, it usually has other connotations to it. And so in kind of listen to the content that you had, I want to make sure it wasn't impacting the end goal, that we're still going to try to reach the end goal of the recommendations. I much prefer that word over best practices, because that's a very, like I said, it's a filtering word as opposed to enhancement.
Well, and actually in the outline of the report, we have recommendations is what the final component of it is. Like I said, the terminology of best practices is what has been placed in the description. But that is a reasonable point. Where semantics-wise, best practice or recommendation, we're going to word it in a particular structured format, and that's where the difference is between just a blanket recommendation and best practice. And the idea is that a specific party or entity should, and then there's some action, and then there may be qualifications, and that's how a best practice recommendation is made.
And I appreciate that. I just worry about, because I've seen before, particularly in political arenas, when you get to stick with a particular term or semantics, that it gets driven the wrong direction. And I just want to, because I have a vested interest in wanting this to succeed, right? Because I would like to see more practitioners in my field as well.
Excellent.
And so in trying to make sure you're not going to put barriers in by using particular words sometimes. I mean, there was another presentation in the last district that I particularly hammered on. And they kept using the word vulnerability when it wasn't, right? Protocols have features that didn't have vulnerabilities. And so it's the same thing here, in that it's important for us to get the semantics correct to make it easier for moving this forward.
Okay, no, that's fair, and I think most of the people in the room who know me would say that I'm probably not a politically correct person anyway. So I would advise that, asked and answered. We believe that our purpose of a working group, if I tear away all the words, is to figure out what we can recommend to this community to improve our ability to recruit, train, and deliver a trained workforce for cybersecurity. That's really, when you peel it all the way back, that's what we're trying to do here, make recommendations on that.
Yeah, and I would offer that the HR departments within companies is a very legitimate focus area for how do we make it better, or how do we get ahead of the challenge. And it's a competitive environment out there for cybersecurity talent. And I look just across federal agencies, and I know of at least one federal agency that, wow, they've cracked the code. They at job fairs not only recruit, they conduct interviews, they are pre-authorized to negotiate salary, and they close the deal on the same day. Wow, that's a best practice. That in onboarding cyber talent. I think best practices also might be the use of the sufficiently granular position descriptions so that when you are bringing on talent, you're not just focusing on perhaps certificates, but you're able to have the position description facilitate a better casting of the net and better interviews when you bring the candidate in. So I think there's a role for best practices in this, and then a recommendation to use or not use or collect those in a meaningful way. But I agree that we shouldn't. Certainly, the group should not distill the entire activity to, we did some best practices.
Yeah, and I'd like to actually further extend it. Is, we keep thinking about how we're going to recruit and all, but it's also training and it's also retraining. So we're not limiting ourselves just to how do I accelerate timing process for hiring, from interview to hire, because that seems to be one of the bugaboos that causes certain companies to lose people or certain agencies, and it's been identified. So like I said, we're casting a fairly broad net. The HR folks, technical folks, as well as management team, I say technical cyber type folks, we're trying to bring them all we are bringing them all together to get the inputs, which is great that we have such a diverse organization. I would say I wish we had more people in HR. I wish we had more people in academia on the working group, but we're extending it out and we're adding people, or we're bringing them in as subject matter experts. But further, what we're doing is what we do in the commercial industry. We're getting information brought in, and we're going to anonymize it and integrate it all together. So you're not going to look at it and be able to say, well, that was the contribution of one carrier or one device manufacturer or one whatever, because we want to protect the anonymity of the companies and what the programs they're doing as well. So it's been a very interesting and exciting opportunity for us, and the people are very much open to sharing, and I've been very excited to be a part of it.
It's, from Comcast, we've been actually using it to see how the best practices are actually working for us to be able to onboard our cybersecurity. And you can call them best practices or recommendations, but the real test for us is, are we able to attract them? Are we able to bring them on board? And are we able to hire the right cybersecurity expert for the right role? Getting to what the Admiral is saying around being very specific around the content of the job descriptions. And we've been taking that and feeding that back into the working group all through our HR organization, backed by our cybersecurity team.
So hopefully this experiential data, well, not hopefully, this experiential data will create an improvement in the product that we deliver. So we're excited about it. So hopefully, when we present, you'll be able to see and have your Q&A at that point in time, and then I'll really be under the gun, I'm sure.
I'll be sure to ask questions.
I know you will, Richard. I don't doubt that.
Any questions on the phone for Drew? Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Drew. We'll move on next to Working Group 8, Priority Services. Bill Reedway, he's on the phone from us for New Star.
Hey, Teresa, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. Yeah, so I understand I'm probably between everybody and the close of the meeting, so I'll be brief as well. So just as a reminder, Working Group 8's responsibility is to assess how priority services programs will evolve to meet the challenges and opportunities of IP networks upon and during the retirement of TDM. So if you'll just move on to the membership slide. Our membership is consistent since the last meeting, with one notable exception. My partner, Tom Anderson, has made the decision to retire, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank him on behalf of myself and on behalf of the working group for all the work that he's done up until this point. And I think we've made the determination to soldier on with a single chair for the remainder of CSRIC 5. And the group has promised to support me as needed. A couple logistical items just in terms of our status. We did finish off our June 30th deliverable on schedule. That was the preparation of what we called at that time draft report number 1. Since that time, we finished out the review cycle of that content. It was complete and coherent with a full set of recommendations to be finalized, with a couple of placeholders and I'll talk about what those are as we close out the presentation. We have made the decision as a working group that the remainder, that those placeholders, basically will fill out Working Group 8's responsibilities for the CSRIC. So we had originally talked about doing 2 reports in December and March of this year. We've made the determination that we can consolidate all of that into a single report, and that is scheduled for delivery in the December meeting. So we'll look forward to a more detailed presentation then. In the interim, we have made the determination to build a scope document as we did before at the beginning of the first quarter, so that we can all get on the same page and divvy out writing assignments for the final 3 months of the year. That'll be due at the very end of this month. Teresa, if you wouldn't mind just skipping to the next steps slide. The slides 5 and 6 are just a kind of a reminder for everybody about what our priority services framework is. That matches up with the outline for the draft report that we delivered in June. For the remainder of the year, we have divided the group's attention between 3 topics to fill out the remainder of the report. The first is how our recommendations will align with the FirstNet program. And we knew when the working started that much of what we were talking about was going to have fairly significant implications for what FirstNet was thinking about and vice versa. We had intended to get some collaboration going earlier in the year based on some sensitivities with respect to the selection process. A lot of that needs to be deferred. So we've shifted our focus with respect to FirstNet alignment on the types of topics that need to be considered as that deployment proceeds over the next couple of phases and as potentially future CSRICs can keep an eye on. We're working with some of the agency liaisons in order to make sure that that's coherent and matches up with the framework that we've established. The second area of focus for the remainder of the year is IoT, specifically in the arena of environmental sensors and healthcare devices. So we're in the process of building out a set of use cases for that and potentially trying to bring in some device manufacturers and platform providers to provide some perspective on that. And then the third item of focus for the remainder of the year is anti-spoofing implications. And with that, we've got a number of participants on the working group that are also participating in the robodialing task force. And there's some significant overlap there that we can take advantage of to round out our recommendations. So as I said, this is kind of a high-level status update. We will be feverishly writing and editing and reviewing for the remainder of the year, and we look forward to our presentation in December. Any questions?
Any questions in the room for Bill? Any questions on the phone? Okay. Great. Thanks so much, Bill. And we'll have our last presentation, Working Group 9 with Brian Daly on Wi-Fi security.
In 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay. Right, if we can have the slides, please. So let me just jump in. Just a refresher on the Working Group 9 objectives and our deliverable. Let's see, get to that one. What we're developing is a recommended best practices for promoting security in networks and devices utilizing Wi-Fi spectrum bands. And again, we're targeting these best practices for March 2017 deliverable. As far as the membership in our group, we've got a good representation from a variety of different organizations and companies that are engaged in Wi-Fi. Everything from service providers to vendors, chip manufacturers to convention centers and venue management representatives. Our FCC liaisons, Peter and Kurian, are assisting us in keeping us on track, and we've also got a document editor from AT&T who's working on some of the deliverables. Quick overview of the status. We've developed an outline for the document, which I'll show briefly here. We've been having biweekly calls and email discussions, taking contributions, and a lot of discussions. The discussions we've been focusing on are use cases and potential Wi-Fi security threats, identifying potential Wi-Fi adversaries, how those adversaries can inflict damage against the system, and some of the observations on Wi-Fi compromises. And within our document itself, let me see. I'm not sure how this works. We've got a document outline where we're looking at current weaknesses of security in Wi-Fi, trying to define Wi-Fi security threats, the use cases and threats most consistently facing Wi-Fi network operators and users. And then we'll move into the summary of the threats, end user experience with Wi-Fi security, and finally end our document with the recommended best practices. I won't go into details of the discussions, but we've had some initial discussions on what Wi-Fi security means, what the issues might be. And when you think of Wi-Fi, you're thinking of data being broadcast over a radio channel. And if you don't use the security measures that are present in the Wi-Fi standards, an attacker can easily get into an unsecured Wi-Fi network to launch attacks against confidentiality, integrity, or availability. And given the relative ease of launching these attacks against those networks that are not protected, it seems prudent to utilize the Wi-Fi security mechanisms as much as possible that are in the standards. And also, the one observation we have is the locality constraint on Wi-Fi attacks. It's really difficult for a criminal enterprise to build a global business model based on exclusively on Wi-Fi vulnerabilities. So we expect attacks against Wi-Fi are opportunistic and at most are just really one tool in a larger tool set. I'm going to skip through some of these details on the potential threats, but I'll highlight some of the use cases. We have some of the ones you might typically think of, the in-home use cases, the public municipality use cases, but we've also brought in, based on the discussion at the last meeting, the IoT cases. We're seeing connected devices becoming more prevalent using Wi-Fi frequency bands, so we wanted to make sure we covered both home IoT devices as well as some of the other use cases such as medical IoT devices. I'm going to skip through the adversaries. There's different skill sets that can be used to attack a system, anywhere from the network to sophisticated software and hardware attacks. We won't go into those in the interest of time today. And these adversary models can inflict, compromises onto any of the three areas we talked about: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I'll jump to the next step slide. So we're going to continue our work to accomplish our mission, and we're taking a lot of input from our subject matter expertise that we've assembled in our group. We'll continue with our biweekly group calls and email discussions, and we'll provide the periodic status updates to the steering committee as well as the CSRIC. And again, we're tracking to give the final report in March of 2017.
Any questions for Brian on the Wi-Fi security? Yes, Richard.
So I noticed that on your list you had vendors and chip makers on the ones that are helping, but you're not having best practices for vendors or chip makers as part of your deliverable?
Well, we're early in the development stage of this. We put together the draft work in progress of the outline for the document, but we're only in the early stages. I anticipate we will have input from vendors and chip makers to be included.
Because I think it's going to be probably one of the most important parts. Besides, if it comes out of the box more secure, right, then you've solved most of your problem before it gets to the user.
Right.
And so if that's not, I think, a beginning part of what you're doing, I think you're doomed for a lot of failure.
Yeah, no, that's definitely been under discussion and consideration.
Right. And the other point you said, you don't think that botnets is a valid people aren't going to be attacking the devices and utilizing them as part of botnets for other kind of infrastructures. Mm-hmm. And that's actually not the case. So we've seen several times already where large organizations have utilized routers and wireless access points as a part of these things, whether it's for transitionary things, for concealing their traffic, for in places of encrypted routing and things. I mean, there was a case, 3 years ago, where the guy went around and found all these routers and EPs and basically botted every one of them. It's like 7.5 million devices around the world. and then utilize it to do further mapping of the internet. So that was a benign utilization of it. However, the same technology is being utilized for the criminals, and so I think you're very naive if you say that's not going to be a target. And that's why I go back to my first statement, which is if you don't have the vendors in the very beginning to deliver in a more secure fashion, then you're going to only open yourself up to a lot of pain further on.
Right. Yeah, we'll definitely take that in, bring that back. Again, we're early work in progress. Just these are some of the discussions just wanted to highlight at this point.
Yeah, let me just add to that. There are a couple of bots right now that have gotten some notoriety just in the last couple of news cycles that are CPE based. We also are seeing a lot of attacks to change the DNS entries, right? So kind of got the mini DNS changer where it's low and slow because it's spread to the edges. So I'm people are familiar with that. It would be good to make sure that's covered.
Sure. Yep. Thank you.
And I would encourage. I'm going to associate with Richard's previous comment on best practices. Please don't confine your work to just best practices here. Certainly, if there are any regulatory gray areas that are today prohibiting, or not prohibiting, but discouraging effective defenses within enterprise Wi-Fi, we very much want to know that as well as a commission so that we can add clarity in what's cricket and what's not, sure. And ensure that companies can confidently and consumers can confidently protect their Wi-Fi use.
Okay, very good.
Admiral said, be bold and push the envelope.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's not going to get fixed.
Right. Yeah, understand.
Any questions on the phone for Brian? Okay, great. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to accelerate closing here. Thank you very much. There's a special place in heaven for CSRIC members who stay through the very end of our marathon meetings. So thank you and safe travels.
The next meeting is December 21st. And it's nice here. It's beautiful here at Christmas time.
It is.
All right.
That is true.
Thank you all.